Chapter 243. They left the palace and headed north again. Ning Kei's route was very clear, which was to follow the caravan that came out of Tuyang City. However, when they came to this snow pass, the intelligence from the Imperial Center Administration and the secret guards had been cut off. They had to explore the rest of the way by themselves. Fortunately, they were very careful along the way. They always kept the Tianqi Mountains clearly visible on their left regardless of the gloomy and snowy weather. Even if they could not catch up with the caravan, it was not a problem for them to go back the way they came. It was unclear whether it was his handwriting or her shameless spirit, but Mo Shanshan did not go with the powerhouses of the Divine Hall. Instead, she went north with him. It was a lonely journey. The two often learned from each other about calligraphy and talisman Taoism, and they both gained something. Ning Kei, in particular, mastered more basic skills of talisman Taoism through her demonstration, and even vaguely felt that he was about to break the realm. He could not help but feel happy. Mo Shanshan was also in a good mood. Just as she said, she liked to see Ning Kei's handwriting. During the journey, she could see Ning Kei drawing on the snow and mud with an ink brush or a branch on a piece of paper every time they stopped to rest. Even the boring and monotonous journey seemed to be enriched, and the snow was like a pool of ink. The rustling sound of the branch in the snow sounded. Ning Kei looked at his handwriting and nodded with satisfaction. He found that under the pressure of Mo Shanshan, not only had his cultivation state improved, but his calligraphy had also improved a lot. Mo Shanshan pulled the scarf in front of her chest to her shoulder, slightly leaned forward, and looked at his handwriting carefully with her head down. She stretched out her right index finger and slowly gestured in the air, as if she was copying. Ning Kei knew that the girl's eyesight was not good, and he was used to her concentration and posture every time she read. At the bottom of the mountain pass, a gust of cold wind mixed with snowflakes blew, causing the scarf on the girl's shoulder to flutter. Her black hair fluttered backwards, contrasting with her slightly red face, making her look very beautiful. Behind the snow dome, the big black horse held its head high and kicked its front hooves in boredom. No one knew what it ate all day long, but it was so hot that it did not seem to be afraid of the cold here at all. There was a maroon mare next to it, with a warm cloth quilt and a cloth band on its hooves, but it still seemed to be a little afraid of the cold. It kept getting close to the big black horse, carefully rubbing against it, as if it wanted to keep warm, but did not want to annoy it. The big black horse snorted softly and seemed a little tired. But it did not move its tall body, but stood upright in the wind and snow, blocking the snow wind blowing from the right side for the maroon mare. Mo Shanshan's fingers in the air slowly stopped and finished copying. But she did not raise her head. Instead, she continued to read the words on the snow, as if she wanted to keep them in mind. Ning Kei reached out to take off the black mask on his face and asked seriously, "Yesterday I asked you about breaking the realm. You said that everyone's situation is different, and the higher you go, the more difficult it is. But I just entered see-through from No Doubt State, which is not a difficult juncture to break the realm. Why is there no movement after such a long time from Dongxing Stockade Village to here?" Mo Shanshan straightened up, looked at him and said quietly, "You just began to understand in spring, and now you have seen the front gate of see-through in less than a year. If you are not lying, then it can only mean that you are a genius in cultivation, which also explains why the headmaster of academy chose you as his student." Ning Kei asked, "You mean that I am already very great compared with others?" Mo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly and she asked, "Who are the others you are talking about?" After a moment of silence, Ning Kei said, "Prince Long Qing." Mo Shanshan looked at him and said seriously, "Didn't you say that you don't accept such a cliché as a lifelong enemy?" Ning Kei laughed and said, "The world says that Prince Long Qing is only one step away from the knowing destiny state. If he really enters the knowing destiny state, I can't be cliché even if I want to," and his smile gradually disappeared, and he said calmly, "The Divine Hall will respect the Academy, but it doesn't mean that they are afraid of the academy. Especially for people like Prince Longqing, he will definitely find a chance to defeat or even kill me personally, so as to perfect his so-called Taoist heart. If he enters the knowing destiny state, he can really beat me like a dog. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly, as if looking at the wind and snow outside the snow cave, and guessed what he was thinking. After a long silence, she said softly, "Do you want to defeat him? Pride and confidence come from strength, and I am not second brother." Ning Ke said, "So I don't expect to defeat him now, but I think that if it is possible to delay his steps into the knowing destiny state, maybe I can catch up with him one day. I think you should have time, although not enough time." Mo Shanshan looked at him, and a rare smile appeared on her usually expressionless face. The smile was a little awkward, but it was full of gratification, warmth, and encouragement. Among the 5 states of cultivation, the end state is the most difficult. It is very difficult to enter the knowing destiny state. Although I can write half-divine talisman now, it is only a lucky chance that I got. I still can't see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. Mo Shanshan looked at him and continued, "Although Prince Longqing is recognized as the most likely to enter the knowing destiny state among the younger generation, I think he just saw the threshold, and there is still some time before he can cross it. A few days ago, I was thinking that the Divine Hall let us enter the wilderness because of this consideration." Ning Ke suddenly thought of something, and he frowned and asked, "You once said that Longqing is not as good as the Tao addict. If Longqing has seen the threshold of the knowing destiny state, then what about the Tao addict? Maybe she has crossed one foot? Maybe she just saw the threshold." Mo Shanshan said, "The strength of the Tao addict lies not only in her state of cultivation, but also in her exquisite mastery of Taoism. It is said that the hierarch of the Divine Hall once praised her for being proficient in all kinds of cultivation method. You can imagine it." Ning Ke was shocked when he heard the words, "proficient in all kinds of cultivation methods." When he was about to ask more specific questions, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and stretched out his arm to hold the big black umbrella behind him. A very weak arrow sounded in the wind and snow outside the pass. Although Mo Shanshan was not as sensitive to the sound of arrows as Ning Ke, as a cultivator in the upper see-through state, she found the speed of the arrow not a little slow. Her exposed fingers moved slightly outside her sleeves and pinched a piece of fu paper. Ning Ke reached out to stop her, because he heard the direction of the arrow, and it should have nothing to do with them. An arrow deeply shot into the gentle slope outside the snow dome. A snow rabbit hiding in the snow slope had its buttocks torn apart by the arrowhead. It struggled with all its might and jumped into the mountain pass. The snow rabbit fell into the snow dome and died after a few bounces. The words written by Ning Ke on the snow ground were trampled into a mess. Heavy footsteps sounded on the snow slope outside the pass. Ning Ke used his eyes to signal Mo Shanshan to let him handle this matter. He released the handle of the umbrella from his back and held the hilt of the knife. A person in an animal skin cotton coat climbed over the edge of the snow dome and looked for the injured snow rabbit. He first saw 2 horses, and then saw Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan. He could not help but be shocked, and drew his bow and arrow to aim at the 2. Ning Ke frowned slightly and looked at the short bow in the person's hands. He noticed that the bow material was a little special, and the twisted wire in the bowstring shone slightly. It seemed that it was not made of animal tendons. Then he noticed that a few strands of long hair floated out from the edge of the person's hat. Looking at the face carefully, it turned out to be a woman in her 30s. He held the hilt of the knife, looked at the woman calmly and said, "We mean no harm." Mo Shanshan looked at him, and did not understand what he wanted to do. Although she could already confirm that the woman was just an ordinary person, shouldn't she be more careful in a place so close to the desolate man's tribe? The woman looked a little surprised when she heard Ning Ke's words. She hurriedly took 2 steps back, and stepped on the edge of the snow dome. Only when she was far enough away from Ning Ke did she seem a little relieved. She asked, "You're from the Central Plains?" Her accent was a little strange. The tip of her tongue rarely moved, and the time between each word was very precise, which made her sound straight and tough. But these 3 words were still understandable. Ning Ke looked at the woman and asked seriously, "Desolate man?" The woman did not answer his question, but looked at the two warily. She pulled the short bow tighter in her hands, making a slight deformation sound as if an arrow would be shot at any time. She continued to ask, "You're from the Central Plains?" Emo Shanshan was not good at lying, and there was no need to lie in this situation. She answered expressionlessly, "I'm from the Great River Kingdom." The woman shook her head and said, "I've never heard of you." Emo Shanshan pointed at Ning Ke and said, "He is a Tang. I think you should have heard of him." Ning Ke thought that this was bad. 1,000 years ago, it was the Tang Empire that drove the desolate men to the cold region of the far north. The hatred between the two sides was as deep as the sea. How could this desolate woman not get mad when she knew that he was a Tang? He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword and prepared to kill the woman before she could make her move. Unexpectedly, when the woman heard the word Tang, she was only slightly startled. She did not have any intense reaction. Instead, she calmed down and said, "I've heard of the Tang." Ning Ke frowned and asked, "Have you heard of it?" "Yes." The woman said in her unique accent, "Everyone in the tribe knows that we moved away many years ago because our ancestors couldn't defeat you." Ning Ke was even more confused and asked, "Then why aren't you angry when you know I'm a Tang?" The woman put away her bow and arrow and said expressionlessly, "If you can't win, you should admit defeat. What's there to be angry about?" Ning Ke scratched his head and said, "It seems that makes sense." This was the first time that Ning Ke and Emo Shanshan had seen the desolate men. Through a short contact and conversation, they found that the desolate men were not the rumored monsters that could eat stones and drink molten iron. They were like them, who needed to hunt, could talk, wore clothes, and ran around every day to make a living. They could not be more ordinary. The desolate woman no longer paid attention to them. She pulled out the arrow from the snow rabbit and carefully observed the wear and tear of the arrowhead. Then she grabbed a snowball and wiped the blood off the rabbit. She then threw it into the bag behind her. Emo Shanshan looked at her quietly and suddenly asked, "Why did you come to the south?" It was Ning Ke's turn to look at her. He came to the wilderness occupied by the desolate men for a very clear purpose. It was not for the divine hall, nor for the peace of the countries in the Central Plains. He was going to find the tomes of arcane. Of course, he did not want to deal with these desolate men. The desolate woman glanced at her and said, "Why can't we come?" Emo Shanshan said, "This is someone else's place." The woman said, "Many years ago this was our hometown. But after we left, it was occupied by those barbarians. Why can't we come back?" Emo Shanshan looked at her and asked seriously, "But the grassland barbarians have lived here for so many years. They have lived here for generations. Now that you have occupied their land, how can they survive?" Ning Ke looked at her and thought to himself, "Although you are a cultivation genius, how can you ask such an idiotic question?" The desolate woman looked at Emo Shanshan as if she was looking at an idiot and said, "If we don't take it back, how can we survive?" Ning Ke burst out laughing. Emo Shanshan glanced at him expressionlessly. Then she led the maroon horse and followed the desolate woman across the edge of the snow dome to walk down the gentle slope. Ning Ke was stunned and hurried to keep up. The big black horse was stunned for a long time and found that no one paid attention to it. They all ran away. It angrily kicked the snow and carried the heavy luggage to keep up with them. After talking for a while, Ning Ke felt that the desolate were really interesting, especially their temperament was very similar to that of the Tangs. But he was still not ready to contact the desolate. He did not expect that Emo Shanshan seemed to have a different idea. Emo Shanshan looked at the desolate woman walking in front of her with a bow on her back and said softly, We will fight with the desolate next spring. Of course, we need to know the real situation of the desolate tribe. The Divine Hall asked us to investigate the enemy, and this desolate woman does not suspect us. Isn't this the best opportunity? Ning-Ke shook his head and thought that the Divine Hall wanted to fight with the desolate. What did it have to do with him? However, since Mo Shanshan insisted on taking this encounter as a part of her mortal world trial, he could not object. After walking out of the snow dome and turning east for a short distance, he saw a lonely tent. The surface of the tent was painted with a black mud-like paint. It seemed to be able to keep out the wind and cold. However, it was obviously far from the settlement of the Desolate Man tribe. He did not know why the Desolate Man-woman lived here. The Desolate Woman did not invite them to be a guest, but she did not show obvious hostility to them either. She let them follow into the tent, threw them a large piece of jerky without enthusiasm, and poured them 2 bowls of hot water. There was not too much salt in the jerky. Although it was tasteless when chewed, it would emit a rough original fragrance if mixed with saliva for a long time. Since Ning-Ke left the city of Wei, he rarely had a chance to touch such things. He could not help chewing with relish, and did not have time to talk at all. Mo Shanshan thanked the desolate woman and tore 2 pieces of meat into her mouth and chewed slowly. Looking at her expression, it was not clear whether it tasted bad or good. The desolate woman lowered her head to deal with a piece of animal skin and ignored them. Although there was no face-to-face in the tent, it was silent. Ning-Ke felt the strange atmosphere and could not help but look up at Mo Shanshan. He thought that she did not say that she wanted to investigate the enemy and check the real situation of the desolate tribe. Could it be that she could speak when she was mute? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 244. Mo Shanshan glanced at him. She was confused and even a little flustered. Obviously, she was not good at it even though she was the world-famous calligraphy addict. Ning-Ke held back his laughter, glanced at the dried meat in his hand, and began to chat with the desolate woman. He was very good at chatting. Since he was a child, he could survive in such a dangerous environment. In addition to being ruthless, the most important characteristic of him was to please others. Generals of the city of Wei, His Majesty, Master Yen Sei, and Senior Sister Professor by the East Window liked him. Who didn't like him? Therefore, it didn't take long for the desolate woman to start chatting with him warmly. Although her accent was a little weird, there was no problem communicating when they slowed down the speed of their conversation. There are a lot of fish in the hot sea, all kinds of fish. The desolate woman grabbed a handful of hay and wiped off the blood on her hand. She spread her arms and said, "My man has seen such a long fish. But speaking of delicious, every year during the Right to Light, the tribe leader will send warriors to dive into the sea to catch the female fish. That kind of fish is really delicious." Ning-Ke put the dried meat in his hand aside and asked curiously, "Female fish?" "Well, because the fish eggs are very big, we call them female fish." The desolate woman stretched out her fingers and gestured exaggeratedly. Then she shook her head and said, "After coming to the south, there are more sheep than before. But it's not so convenient to eat fish." From the conversation, Ning-Ke learned that the desolate men went down from the hot sea in the cold region in spring and robbed a large grassland of the palace. Before winter, they had stored enough food and even kept a lot of sheep. But probably based on tradition, the tribe still sent the desolate men to hunt everywhere. The cold wind hit the tent with snowflakes. Because of the strange paint on the outside, it made a dull sound. Ning-Ke thought of what he had seen along the way and was puzzled. He asked, "Even if it's hunting, it doesn't make sense to come to such a remote place. It's not safe to be too far from the tribe." He had been hunting in Min Mountain since he was a child, so he was very clear about the hidden dangers of hunting far from the tribe. The desolate woman said, "This is the rule of the tribe. During the winter ceremony, you have to live alone for the whole winter. Ning Ke asked curiously, "What is the winter ceremony?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. Emo Shanshan, who had been sitting quietly beside him, also looked at the door. The heavy curtain was lifted, and a short figure rushed in, shouting joyfully, "I'm back!" It was a skinny little boy carrying a fat badger on his shoulder. His face was full of joy and pride, but when he saw Ning Ke and Emo Shanshan, he suddenly became vigilant. "It's a guest." The desolate woman stepped forward and took the prey on his shoulder. She gently pulled it with her fingertips and quickly blocked the cold badger's bleeding wound. She smiled and patted the little boy's head. Ning Ke looked at the little boy, who was definitely no more than 12 years old. He could not help but feel shocked that he could hunt such a big winter badger in such cold weather. Then he thought of his life in Min Mountain when he was younger than the boy many years ago, and could not help but feel a little emotional. "This is my son." The desolate woman looked at the surprised expressions of the two people from the Central Plains and laughed heartily. She said, "The winter ceremony you mentioned just now is his winter ceremony. According to the tribe rule, in the winter of the year when he is 12 years old, parents will accompany the child to the mountains to hunt. Before the North Hot Sea thaws, the child will be considered an adult if he can hunt half a cart of prey." She looked at the little boy sternly, but could not hide the tenderness in her eyes. She said, "Next year, he will become a warrior and then have his own family. So the winter ceremony is the last time we accompany him." The desolate would become a warrior at the age of 12? Ning Ke had not yet gotten rid of the shock. Then he thought of the previous sentence about having a family and could not help but say enviously, "We Tangs can't get married so early." Hearing the word Tangs, the desolate boy, who was already a little vigilant, suddenly became more nervous. He subconsciously wanted to hide behind his mother, but thinking that he was going to become a warrior of the tribe during the winter ceremony, he forcibly plucked up his courage to stand in front of his mother and stared at Ning Ke fiercely. The desolate woman slapped him hard on the back of the head and scolded him sternly, "What's the big deal about having a fat badger? The winter ceremony needs half a cart of prey. It's okay if it's a small cart like the one in my hometown. But didn't you see the cart pushed by a man in autumn? The cart used by those barbarians is so big. It's not so easy to fill half a cart." The little desolate boy was driven out of the tent by his mother with sticks and intimidation. He carried a wooden bow and arrows on his back, and once again began the difficult hunting activities that he needed to become a desolate warrior. Ning Ke listened to the desolate woman's previous judgment about the small cart in his hometown and the big cart of the barbarians. He could not help but laugh happily. The desolate woman lowered her head and continued her work. She took a smooth piece of wood and kept rolling the fur under her feet. From time to time, she raised her arm to wipe the sweat on her forehead. Ning Ke thought of the prey covered by snow outside the tent and thought that this kind of work was really hard. He asked, "Sister, where is the child's father?" "He died in the battle with those barbarians in spring." The desolate woman did not raise her head. Her tone did not change. It was still flat and stiff, as if she was telling a story that had happened a long time ago and had nothing to do with her. It was even a story that was about to fade away. Suddenly, she raised her head and stared at Ning Quebec. She asked, Will the Tangs come and fight us?" "Probably not." Ning Ke looked at the expression on the woman's face and said in a serious tone, "Definitely not." Whether the Tang Empire would send an army to fight against the desolate was a decision that could only be made by the emperor and the ministers in the court. How could he know whether they would or not? But no matter whether they would or not, he could only say no in front of the desolate. And he had to say it firmly and decisively. Emo Shanshan did not say anything and just glanced at him again. The desolate woman was stunned after hearing his answer. She showed a rare smile and said, "That's good." Emo Shanshan looked at her quietly and suddenly asked, "Even if the Tangs don't come, There are many other countries in the Central Plains, especially the Divine Hall. Aren't you worried? The desolate woman leaned forward and put her weight on the piece of wood. She pressed hard on the animal's skin and murmured, "As long as the Tangs don't come, what's there to worry about?" As night fell, the wind and snow outside the tent stopped. The little desolate boy came back. But this time he looked a little ashamed because his hands and shoulders were empty. The desolate woman did not say anything. She boiled a pot of hot soup and stewed a leg of lamb from somewhere under the snow. She added some spicy seasoning and the four of them ate in silence. "You can only stay here for one night." The desolate woman put away the boning knife and looked at Ninquebec. She added, "Because this is the rule of the winter ceremony." Ning Ke expressed his gratitude and walked out of the tent with Mo Shanshan. The two walked toward a snow slope not far away. At this time, the snow outside the tent had stopped and the clouds had dispersed. The high dark night sky was dotted with countless stars. The starlight sprinkled on the snow covering the wilderness and hills, reflecting a faint blue light. From Chang unto the wilderness, I heard some stories about the desolate men from the academy on the way. Ning Ke breathed the cold and fresh air outside the tent and looked at the faint silhouette of the withered trees in the distance. He said, "Do you know why the wilderness is called the wilderness?" Mo Shanshan had lived in the southern Great River Kingdom for a long time and was very unfamiliar with this territory. She could not help frowning slightly when she heard his question. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Isn't it because this wilderness is very desolate? There are endless green grasslands and all kinds of beautiful lakes. There are evergreen forests in the majestic Tianchi Mountain and countless beasts live here. How can this place be considered desolate?" Ning Ke looked at her profile and said with a smile, "The wilderness is not desolate. The reason why it is called the wilderness is that this beautiful wilderness belongs to the desolate men." Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and asked, "What do you want to say?" "Nothing," Ning Ke said. "Just now in the tent you looked at me a lot. What did you want to say at that time?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and said seriously, "I want to remind you that these people are the desolate men and are our enemies. You are trying to find out the enemy's situation and deliberately befriend them, but be careful not to forget your position." Ning Ke laughed. After a pause, he looked at her and said, "What position should I stand on?" Mo Shanshan said expressionlessly, "The remnants of the devil's doctrine are of course the enemy." Ning Ke looked at her and asked in confusion, "I have always wanted to know why the devil's doctrine is the enemy." Without waiting for Mo Shanshan to answer, he continued, "I have thought about it. The devil's doctrine is only different from Haotian Taoism in terms of cultivation. It is at most a branch of the Divine Hall. How can it become the embodiment of evil?" Mo Shanshan frowned in silence and stared at his eyes as if she had seen something very strange. She said with sadness and sympathy, "Don't let others hear you talk like this in the future, and don't let me hear it." Ning Ke found that the girl's expression did not seem to be joking, and he could not help but be slightly stunned. After a long time, he stepped on a withered branch into the snow with the sole of his shoe and said calmly, "In the past, you have been meditating by the Ink Lake and have not experienced much of the world. Now that you have seen so many ugly things and the performance of the people of the Divine Hall on the meadow, do you still have a heart of reverence for the Divine Hall?" Mo Shanshan looked at the night sky above her head and blinked her eyes. She had difficulty focusing her eyes and looked a little lost. After a while, she said softly, "Even if I don't respect the Divine Hall, I still have to respect Haotian." Ning Ke followed her gaze and shook his head. He said, "Reverence is really meaningless." Mo Shanshan looked back at him and said seriously, "But the evil deeds of the devil's doctrine are always true. Yesterday's activity was more tiring than writing 10,000 words. My cervical vertebra was seriously injured. I wrote this late yesterday and posted it on time. Today I will go out for personal affairs. I hope it will be smooth and fast, and I will go home soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 245. Shui Yihan heard a lot about the Devil's Doctrine. They talked about the Devil's Doctrine and the Devil's Doctrine. In short, they talked about the evil and bloody past. For example, a certain elder of the Devil's Doctrine with the surname Feng was particularly interested in human skin. Another elder of the Devil's Doctrine with the surname Yun had done things that could even make Elder Feng vomit. Ning Ke listened to the girl in silence. He did not vomit because he had seen more horrible scenes of hell in his life. Thinking of Mr. Liu's attitude towards the Devil's Doctrine survivor at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, he had a deeper understanding of the attitude of orthodox cultivators towards the Devil's Doctrine. However, his own attitude did not change. Of course, he would not try to persuade Mo Shanshan or other people who followed the teachings of Haotian. Sometimes there was no reason to talk about faith. He could only try to dispel her vigilance in other ways. The Devil's Doctrine has withered these years and even disappeared. Why are you still so vigilant? Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly and said, disappearing doesn't mean that they don't exist. The Devil's Doctrine hiding in the dark is even more terrifying. Especially now that the Desolate Man's tribe is moving south, the Divine Hall has to be wary of the Devil's Doctrine reviving. Ning Ke looked back at the lonely tent in the snow and thought of the desolate mother and son in the tent. He shook his head and said, although the Devil's Doctrine originated from the Desolate Man's tribe, you can't treat all the desolate men as members of the Devil's Doctrine. Moreover, it has been more than 1,000 years. Perhaps the desolate men have already forgotten what happened in the past. In the Desolate Man's tribe, the Devil's Doctrine is called the Enlightenment Doctrine. Mo Shanshan said seriously, when the Tang Empire defeated the Desolate Man's tribe, the desolate men were forced to move north to the cold region. Many powerhouses of the Enlightenment Doctrine stayed in the south and scattered to the grassland and the central plains. They never stopped attacking the Divine Hall. This is the origin of the Devil's Doctrine. Hearing the Enlightenment Doctrine, Ning Ke naturally thought of the great divine priest of light who went to the wilderness to preach and founded the Devil's Doctrine. He also thought of the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane that was lost in the wilderness. Mo Shanshan continued expressionlessly, every once in a while, the experts of the Devil's Doctrine will go to the cold region of the far north to select disciples from the Desolate Man's tribe. The Desolate Man and the Devil's Doctrine have a close relationship that cannot be broken. Now that the Desolate Man is moving to the south, how can the Divine Hall not be vigilant? Ning Ke was puzzled and asked, why did the Devil's Doctrine do this? If he wanted to expand his influence in the world, shouldn't he accept disciples? Why did he go through so much trouble to recruit the Desolate Man as a disciple? Of course, the Devil's Doctrine will also develop sects in the south. However, their cultivation method forcibly absorbs the heavens and earth into their bodies. Such an evil and rebellious nature cannot be tolerated by the heavens. When ordinary humans cultivate, it is extremely easy for the chi of heaven and earth to explode and die. However, the Desolate Man's physique is special and is as strong as metal and stone. It is suitable for them to cultivate in the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore, the Devil's Doctrine will definitely choose disciples from the Desolate Man tribes. Ning Ke was silent for a moment. He thought that perhaps it was not the special constitution of the Desolate Man that was suitable for cultivating the Devil's Doctrine, but the great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine had created such a cultivation method because of the special constitution of the Desolate Man. He looked at Mo Shanshan and said, "You should know the great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine." Mo Shanshan nodded. Ning Ke said, "If you don't care about the disrespect of the Devil's Doctrine's cultivation method to Haotian, don't you think it is very interesting? The Devil's Doctrine is completely a branch of Haotian Taoism." Mo Shanshan frowned slightly and looked into his eyes. she said, although the devil's doctrine calls itself light, it worships Yama. How can such an evil doctrine that disrespects Haotian be compared to Haotian Taoism? Ning Ke thought of the legends he had heard when he was young and was slightly stunned. He asked, "Isn't Yama a legend?" Mo Shanshan looked back at the distant wilderness and said softly, "Everyone has heard of this legend when they were young, but no one knows where the underworld is, whether there is Yama, and no one will believe in it. Even the attitude of the devil's doctrine is very strange. They believe in Yama, but on the other hand, the people in the devil's doctrine are extremely afraid of Yama's arrival. Because in their doctrine, the arrival of Yama means the arrival of darkness. They don't like darkness." Ning Ke listened to her and thought of the people in the devil's doctrine who worshipped Yama in the dark cave but wished they could never meet Yama. He could not help but laugh and said, "What a group of strange and contradictory people." The night sky was filled with stars. The starlight fell on the white snow covering the wilderness, making the night seem like dawn. The air after the snow was extremely pure, so there was no obstruction to the view. The tents in the middle of the snowfield could be seen from afar. That was the settlement of the desolate man's tribe. It was quiet and beautiful like the snow village in the fairy tale. Ning Ke looked at that place quietly. It was difficult to connect the desolate man's tribe with the dark legends, the distant past, and the bloody history. At this moment, a large mass of dark clouds floated over from the south and occupied the entire sky above their head. The starlight that filled the entire sky was blocked behind it, and not a single trace of it could be seen. The entire world had darkened. On the pitch-black snowfield, near the mountain, there were a few lonely tents. In these tents lived the desolate man who were performing the winter ritual like the mother and son. There were a few protruding rocks in the snow outside one of the tents. Suddenly the rock moved. It turned out to be 3 people dressed in black. The material of this kind of black clothes was extremely thick and hard. The hood on their backs covered their faces, so when they silently appeared on the snowy ground, they looked exactly like rocks. These 3 black rock-like men in black were deacons from the judicial department of the Divine Hall. They were also the soul-reaping messengers in the hearts of the remnants of the devil's doctrine and traitors. When the countries in the Central Plains were still planning for next spring's attack, the judicial department of the Divine Hall had already sent a large number of terrifyingly powerful deacons into the depths of the wilderness. The Divine Hall's attitude towards the desolate man was very simple. It was exactly the same as Ning Ke's attitude towards his enemies. A dead desolate man was a good desolate man. All desolate men deserved to die. However, these deacons of the judicial department had important tasks and did not have the strength to challenge or provoke the desolate man's tribe, which had countless powerful warriors. However, when they met these lone desolate men tonight, they could not suppress their disgust towards the darkness. It was as if they had smelled the world's worst stench, like a lynx patrolling at night seeing a mouse crawling in a hole. Even if they were expressionless and silent as rocks, their hearts were trembling with excitement and could not control themselves. This was because the education they had received since childhood and the environment they had lived in for decades had given them some almost instinctive mental reactions. The cruel killing of the heretics was the greatest source of pleasure in their lives. Therefore, when these 3 black rock-like deacons of the judicial department walked into the lonely tent, they did not consider the consequences of provoking the desolate man's tribe or whether it would endanger the mission of the Divine Hall. They only wanted to kill the source of the stench and kill these big mice cruelly. They comforted themselves by thinking that there were very few desolate men. As long as they could kill one more, it would be a great contribution to the cause of light. A few soft sounds rang out. The unexpected attack allowed them to successfully subdue the desolate man's warrior and tie up his wife and son at the same time. A deacon slowly took off his black hat and looked at the desolate man expressionlessly. He slowly reached out and placed his hand on the man's head. He said piously, "In the name of Haotian, I hereby render judgment." A very faint but extremely pure light without any impurities lit up under the deacon's palm. This light seemed to be able to penetrate solid objects and clearly illuminated the joints in his palm. At the same time, it illuminated the desolate man's dark face and the anger and unwillingness in his eyes. The desolate man's wife and son were already dead on the ground beside him. Their eyes were filled with tears of blood. The next moment, the desolate man died painfully under the Hautian divine light. The 3 deacons of the judicial department of the divine hall slowly lifted their hats to cover their faces and silently walked out of the tent. Dark clouds covered the stars in the wilderness, and the wind and snow blew, flapping their heavy black deacon robes. Under the shadow of the black hats, the 3 deacons' pale faces turned a strange red. It took them a long time to calm their heavy breathing due to excitement, and then they walked away. Through the long history, the deacons of the Hautian Divine Hall finally saw their destined enemy again and launched an attack that they had not seen for thousands of years. What happened on this snowy night was originally qualified to be recorded in the Hautian scriptures or in the history books of the Central Plains countries. However, because what happened later was unfortunately buried by the wind and snow, no one knew about it. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan woke up almost at the same time. They slept in the corner of the tent. It was a little wet and cold, but the reason why they woke up was not because they could not sleep. It was because they sensed that someone was approaching the tent and the person was very powerful. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said, "I felt the aura of Hautian divine light. It should be someone from the divine hall." Ning Ke glanced at the desolate man, mother, and son, who were still sleeping, and frowned. He said, "What should we do?" Mo Shanshan looked at his eyes and seemed a little puzzled. She asked, "What do you mean?" Ning Ke spread out his hands and said, "If we fight, who should we help?" Mo Shanshan frowned slightly. She had never thought about this problem. As a believer of Hautian, she should naturally stand on the side of the divine hall. Did she even need to think about it? Ning Ke smiled and reminded her, "Don't forget that we are living and eating with the desolate man. If the people coming are those ice deacons from the judicial department of the divine hall, they will definitely think that we are traitors." Mo Shanshan said calmly, "We can explain that we are trying to find out the enemy's situation." Ning Ke smiled and said, "I don't believe they will believe this explanation." The tent curtain was lifted and the cold wind blew the snowflakes into the tent. 3 black figures like rocks looked silent and solemn under the light of the small fire in the tent. Busy as a dog. Fortunately, he is still alive. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 246. The curtain of the tent was lifted, and the wind blew in with snowflakes. The dim and small fire suddenly shrank, as if it was about to be extinguished. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the desolate mother and son, who were covered by the quilt, exhaled moisture and instantly turned into white mist. However, they did not seem to wake up immediately. The 3 deacons in black of the judicial department of the divine hall silently looked at the desolate mother and son in the dim light of the fire. Listening to the 2 long breaths, they slowly stepped forward and stretched out their hands that were hidden in their black sleeve. Suddenly, the quilt was lifted, and a small crossbow appeared in the desolate woman's hand. She aimed at the deacon in black and pulled the trigger. It turned out that she had already woken up and was just waiting for a chance to make a surprise attack. With a swoosh, the sharp crossbow arrow was shot in front of the deacon in black. The deacon in black rolled up his sleeves and suddenly came down like a dark cloud. After the crossbow arrow entered the sleeve cloud, it instantly disappeared without a trace, and no one knew where it had gone. Then, a ray of light shone in the depths of the black cloud on the sleeve of the deacon of the judicial department. A very narrow and thin Taoist sword, under the control of the exquisite psyche power, pierced the weak flame on the bonfire and stabbed the chest of the desolate woman. However, for some unknown reason, the desolate woman's body suddenly tilted, and the narrow Taoist sword did not pierce into her chest, but flew past her shoulder. The leather robe on the woman's shoulder was torn by the tip of the sword, and there was a very shallow wound on the slightly dark skin inside. The injury was not too serious, as if her skin was harder than steel. The 3 deacons of the judicial department noticed something strange in the tent, and there was a rapid fluctuation of psyche power around them. 2 of them looked at the dark corner with gloomy eyes. The deacon in black stretched out his left hand and grabbed the little desolate boy who had just woken up, and dragged him to his feet through the air. He called back the Taoist's sword, and silently and without hesitation, stabbed the little boy's throat. The desolate woman was knocked down to the ground. Although the injury was not serious, some strange power attached to the Taoist's sword made her body suddenly weak. Seeing that her child was about to be nailed to the ground by the narrow sword, she could not help but let out a painful and sad howl like a dying mother beast. After a swoosh, the narrow and sharp hiltless Taoist sword pierced through the ground that had been softened by the fire and turned into a tiny, round black hole before it disappeared. The little desolate boy did not die. At the moment when the Taoist's sword stabbed down, it was as if a pair of invisible hands had grabbed the little boy's shoulders and dragged him away. That black-clothed deacon slowly turned his head. Just like his 2 companions, he silently looked towards a dark corner of the tent. Previously, they only heard 2 breaths and did not think that there were other people in the tent. However, at this moment, they were certain that there were other enemies because they heard the drawn-out breathing sound from the corner. Because the 2 people in the dark corner let them hear their own breathing. Out of the corner of his eyes, Ning Ke noticed that Mo Shanshan's right hand, which was hanging by her side, moved slightly. He knew that she had saved the little desolate boy, so he was more confident about what would happen later. Mo Shanshan looked at the 3 men who hid their faces in the shadow of black hats. Looking at their dark and heavy coats that hung down to their feet, she naturally thought of the West Hill Divine Palace, which was the most hated and feared institution. She frowned slightly and said, "Are you deacons of the judicial department?" The 3 black-clothed deacons did not nod or answer. They just looked at her and Ning Ke in silence. Because of the angle of the light, they could not see their eyes, but they could clearly feel the coldness and power contained in their silence. Mo Shanshan frowned even more. She could understand the Divine Hall's vigilance against the desolate men, but for the time being, she did not understand why the deacons of the judicial department would try to kill the desolate man and his mother without announcing it. She secretly wondered if the desolate man and his mother had a secret identity that would affect the Divine Hall's affairs. As one of the 3 calligraphy addicts in the world, she naturally would not be extremely afraid of the black-clothed deacons of the judicial department like ordinary Haotian believers. However, she was a believer of Haotian, and her master was a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. This trip to the wilderness was also under the Divine Hall's edict. Of course, she would not choose to be enemies with these 3 deacons of the judicial department. To avoid any possible misunderstanding, she decided to reveal her identity. However, at this moment, the black-clothed deacon who was the leader asked first, "Are you people from the Central Plains?" This black-clothed deacon's voice was not hoarse and unpleasant like the rubbing of iron and stone, nor did he deliberately reveal a sense of coldness and toughness. He just spoke calmly, but it made people feel a little cold. Mo Shanshan was slightly startled. She glanced at the desolate man and his mother behind Ning Ke, and thought that she had guessed the reason for the hostility of these deacons. She gently explained, "Yes, but don't misunderstand." Before she finished her words, the black-clothed deacon who was the leader shook his head and said emotionlessly, "There is no misunderstanding." The second black-clothed deacon said coldly, "You are people from the Central Plains, but you are with the desolate men." The third black-clothed deacon said coldly, "You did not kill the 2 desolate men, so you are either heretics who betrayed Haotian or remnants of the devil's doctrine." The black-clothed deacon calmly concluded, "So there is no misunderstanding. You deserve to die." There was no pause between the 3 black-robed deacons' sentences. They were very natural and smooth, as if they had said it countless times. Or perhaps it was to prove that these deductions were natural to them, so there was no need for them to think. Ning Ke was a little amazed at the skill of these deacons in crosstalk. He wondered why Prince Long Qing, the bigwig of the judicial department, was not so interesting when he met him in Chang'an. He could not help but laugh. He looked at Mo Shanshan and said, "I said that no one would believe me, but you did not." Then he looked at the 3 black-clothed deacons and said, "Anyone who wants to be a deacon in the judicial department must be able to recite the dialogue you just said, right? Speaking of which, it is a little difficult to cooperate so well." He spoke in a serious tone, so it sounded funny. The 3 deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall came to the depths of the wilderness to kill some desolate men, including the desolate man and his mother in the tent. Whether it was for the glory of Haotian, for the peace and prosperity of the Central Plains, or for the everlasting foundation of the Divine Hall, these deacons thought that killing was a very serious matter. However, Ning Ke was good at making funny things serious, and he was also good at making serious things funny. Therefore, the 3 black-clothed deacons felt that their belief had been humiliated, and they were very angry. Their faces were covered by black hats, and their burning eyes could not be seen. However, the slightly trembling black clothes and the rapid fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth in the tent all proved the deacons' anger and the fact that they were about to attack. Mo Shanshan looked at the 3 black-clothed deacons expressionlessly and said, "We can explain." The leading black-clothed deacon said emotionlessly, "Surrender and then explain." As soon as he finished speaking, the deacon in black took a step forward. His thin and pale hands stretched out of his sleeves and covered Ning Ke's head from above. Countless beams of extremely thin pale golden light gushed out of his pale fingertips and instantly formed something similar to a birdcage, locking Ning Ke's body in it. Since the appearance of the 3 deacons of the judicial department, Mo Shanshan had not shown much emotion on her face, because she believed that even if there was a misunderstanding, she and Ning Ke would not be at a disadvantage. However, when she saw the light golden light spurting out from the fingers of the deacon, she could not help but be slightly shocked and said in surprise, "The confinement?" The confinement Taoism was one of the profound Taoism skills of Haotian Taoism, and it was a secret of the judicial department. It was said that the confinement Taoism skill performed by the great divine priest of judgment was close to the divine skill. This kind of divine hall Taoism skill could forcibly change the subtle direction of the chi of heaven and earth, and thus control the space of the opponent's movement. Once successfully performed, it could be used to deal with powerhouses whose state was more than 2 levels higher than the user. Seeing that the black-clothed deacon could easily perform the confinement Taoism skill, Mo Shanshan was sure that he must be an important figure in the judicial department. She could not help but frown and remind him, "Don't resist." There was a very light golden light floating on the surface of the light, like the fire at dusk in the southern Central Plains. Ning Ke looked at the thin lines that were not far away from him, and had a very strange feeling in his heart. He always felt that these lines did not exist in reality, but he could clearly feel that the chi of heaven and earth around him had been cut into many tiny pieces, which seemed very dangerous. He had always been cautious about methods that he could not understand at the moment. After hearing Mo Shanshan's reminder, he chose not to attack immediately, but he was a little confused about the principle of this Taoism skill that controlled space. If the confinement was formed by cutting the space, then if it was directly used on the enemy, wouldn't it be able to directly cut the enemy into countless pieces of flesh and blood? The reason that the deacon of the judicial department did not do so was definitely not because the people in the divine hall were very merciful, but because he could not do it at all. This meant that the confinement was not the real Taoism skill of space. Speaking of which, a Taoism skill that could control real space must be above the 5 states, and it was not easy to encounter one. Ning Ke looked at the thin lines close at hand, and with his excellent perceptual acuity, He tried to clearly see the structure of these lines. Gradually, he found that the confinement Taoism skill was not cutting the space, but affecting the fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth, forming countless small turbulence around him. These primordial qi turbulence were like the wooden bars of a prison cell, which looked indestructible, and there might be many spikes hidden on them. If one tried to push them by force, one's hands would be pierced all over and covered with blood. As he was thinking about these things, Ning Ke in the confinement Taoism was silent and even a little dull, but this did not mean that he had decided to surrender. He just wanted to have more opportunities to observe. However, he did not know that the style of the judicial department of the Divine Hall was very similar to his fighting style. Before making sure that the enemy had no ability to fight back, the deacons of the judicial department would never give up. The deacon in black slightly raised his head, and the firelight reflected his pale and calm face. With a low shout, light suddenly appeared between his thin and white hands, and a dim shadow blasted at Ning Ke's chest and abdomen, who was trapped in the confinement Taoism skill. The acupoints of the snow mountain and ocean of qi of a cultivator were located there, and once hit, it was very likely that the acupoints would be destroyed and the cultivator would die. The dim shadow that the deacon in black sent out was obviously very powerful. Seeing this scene, Emo Shanshan's calm eyes finally flashed with anger. But she did not have time to make a move, because Ning Ke made the first move. An extremely bright and stunning saber light flashed, illuminating the dark tent. Before this saber light, both the small bonfire that was about to be extinguished and the confinement of golden threads in the black-robed deacon's palm became incomparably dim. The blade of the padao cut straight at the confinement in front of Ning Quebec. When the sharp blade touched the golden threads, it made a sizzling sound, as if it was about to be melted. Seeing that the blade was about to be corroded by the golden threads, the dense talisman patterns on the slender and long blade suddenly lit up. A stream of cold talisman power gushed out from the blade and easily defeated the power of Haotian's divine light contained in the confinement Taoism skill of the deacon in black, and smashed the seemingly magical and powerful golden threads into pieces. Thousands of extremely subtle and crisp cracking sounds rang almost at the same time, as if the strings of thousands of barbarian iron zither had been broken at the same time, or thousands of iron centipedes and kites had their strings broken at the same time. Crack, 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 crack. The thousands of golden threads of the confinement Taoism skill were blown into a mess by the knife wind, drifting everywhere, and no longer had any power. The reason for this situation was not that the confinement Taoism skill of the judicial department of the Divine Hall was unworthy of its reputation, but that the deacon in black was not strong enough to display the real confinement. It was not that Ning Ke suddenly leaped from the no-doubts state to the upper see-through state, but because his padao and the talisman on it were personally made by his two senior brothers in the back mountain. How could an unknown important figure from the judicial department compete with the wisdom and state of the core disciples of the headmaster of academy? Breaking the confinement with a knife was just the beginning. Ning Ke was even more ruthless than the judicial department. Once he started, he would not stop until he saw death. Therefore, the knife light that broke the confinement cut the golden threads into pieces, and came to the front of the deacon without any hindrance. The knife light illuminated the deacon's pale face. An extremely fine silver needle had pierced into his eyeball at an unknown time, leaving only a little bit of light flickering in the air. The deacon did not have time to cry out in pain, nor did he have time to be shocked by the young man's exquisite control of the qi of heaven and earth. He only had time to realize that the psyche power he had just condensed had dissipated because of the sharp pain in his head. Then he was cut in two by the downward slash of the saber. The two parts of his body did not separate for the time being, only a clear bloodline. It was a simple and clean death. The second deacon in black retreated quickly, waving his hands in front of him, sprinkling divine light lines. Ning Ke abandoned his knife and jumped up like an ape, avoiding those dangerous lines, and jumped above the deacon. A piece of cloth fell. Ning Ke stretched out his hands and grabbed the deacon's face with his fingertip. Then he kicked the deacon's sternum with his knees as fast as lightning. With a crisp sound, the deacon's sternum was completely broken. Taking advantage of the forward momentum, the two fell on the snow outside the tent. Ning Ke twisted his hands and broke the deacon's neck. The pale hands of the third deacon in black had quietly come to Ning Ke's back. His palms shone brightly like a fierce burning flame. Ning Ke did not care. The flame-like divine light in the deacon's palms instantly turned into real flames. Not only his hands. Under the black clothes, the deacon's whole body was burning. He instantly turned into charcoal. After another moment, he turned into flying ash. The deacon's robe lost its support and slowly floated to the ground. Ning Ke looked back at Emo Shanshan and smiled. He walked back into the tent and picked up the padao on the ground. The body of the first deacon in black, who died, slowly separated at this time. Blood gushed out like a flood and slowly flowed out of the tent, dyeing the white snow on the field red. Unknowingly, the clouds in the sky dispersed again, and the stars shone brightly. Between heaven and earth, it was all white. Emo Shanshan's face was also a little pale. Finally finished a paragraph. I started writing it as soon as I got home. I feel much better. I hope everyone likes it. I feel that this sentence is like what a singer said. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 247. The sky cleared up and the morning light gradually arrived. The beasts that had woken up to hunt for food walked through the cold-resistant forest. They shook off the snow covering the branches, revealing the yellow and black color of the branches. The boundless snowfield gained some color and vitality. However, looking at the thick blood stains that were gradually buried by the snow outside the tent, the girl's face was still pale. Emo Shanshan of Mogan Mountain had never killed anyone. She came to the wilderness and began to kill people, but she never killed her own people. For the people of Haotian Kingdom in the Central Plains, the people of the Divine Hall were naturally their own people. Her teacher was a visiting professor of the Divine Hall. She believed in Haotian and entered the wilderness to investigate the enemy under the order of the Divine Hall. As a result, she killed 3 deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall in the dark night yesterday. Emo Shanshan was not afraid. She was just a little confused and couldn't accept the fact mentally. She thought about it for half a night, but she still couldn't figure out why the situation developed like this. Why did she naturally burn the deacon of the judicial department into ashes with the sky-burning talisman after Ning Ke started to fight back? She didn't even think about it. Ning Ke squatted at the entrance of the tent with a bowl of meat soup in his hand and drank it happily. The mutilated bodies of the deacons in black, not far away from the tent, obviously didn't affect his appetite at all. His gaze fell on Emo Shanshan's pale cheek. He noticed that her usually undisciplined and indifferent eyes were a little confused and helpless at this moment. He seemed to understand something and stood up to comfort her. Some things have been done. There is no point in regretting it after it's done, other than burdening yourself with more mental burden. Emo Shanshan shook her head slowly. Her beautiful eyelashes gently flickered. She looked into his eyes and said very seriously, "Reflection can make us do less wrong in the future. Or do you think we don't need to reflect on it? If it's the inexplicable battle last night." Ning Ke shrugged and drank the last bit of meat soup in the bowl. Then he said, "Of course I don't need to reflect on it. I don't care who they are in the judicial department of the Divine Hall. I only know that they wanted to kill me, so it's natural for me to fight back." Then he added very seriously, "The 3 deacons of the judicial department were weaker than us. But they came to kill us and died in our hands. It's a matter of intelligence. And if we still get killed by them, then it's a matter of emotional intelligence. The former is called stupidity can be cured, while the latter is called idiocy can't be cured." Hearing such vulgar words, Emo Shanshan couldn't help but frown. She recalled the fight last night and explained to the dead man seriously, "The confinement Taoism is similar to the Chi of Heaven and Earth Lock or the encircling formation. Yesterday, the 3 deacons didn't want to kill you immediately. They just wanted to subdue you. But that person immediately wanted to cripple my cultivation." Ning Ke smiled and reminded her, "I don't have the habit of being beaten up and then reasoning with you. Like I said before, there's no cure for this kind of mental retardation in EQ." Mo Shanshan said very seriously, "Since I'm here, of course I won't let you be crippled." This was a very common sentence, but there was a natural confidence in it. The girl killed the deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Temple. She was a little absent-minded, but it did not mean that she would think that those deacons were stronger than her. This kind of protective words might make many young men feel a little unhappy. But Ning Ke looked at her bright eyes and felt a little touched. Because of this, he felt inexplicably nervous. In order to get rid of this nervousness as soon as possible, he shook his head and said, "Even if these deacons of the judicial department can't deal with us, what about the desolate mother and son? When they want to kill, will you stop them or not?" Ning Ke looked at the girl and said with a smile, "You are kind-hearted. Of course you won't watch the orphan and the widow being bullied. Moreover, we have eaten so much dried meat from them. How can we not help them kill some people?" Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyes and looked at the toes sticking out from the edge of the thick cotton dress. She didn't know what to say to this guy at all. She thought that although he and I are not afraid of people from the Divine Hall, how can you say that killing a few deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Hall is like killing 2 sheep on the road? The girl murmured softly, "But they are people from the Divine Hall." When cleaning up the bodies last night, Ning Ke found an ID token from the black clothes of the deacons of the judicial department that he had cut in half. Mo Shanshan confirmed the identity of the deacon in black. It seemed that he was a family member of an important person in the Divine Hall. However, Ning Ke was not afraid, because no one could do anything to him as long as there was no evidence. Although he believed in Haotian like everyone else in the world, he had been homeless since he was a child and had seen many ugly things. Besides, he struggled to survive at the bottom, so he did not have much reverence for the legendary Divine Hall. Later, when he returned to Chang'an City and entered the academy, he was influenced by the pride and narcissism of the mountain for a long time, so his reverence for the Divine Hall was even weaker. Moreover, because of his 2 encounters with Prince Long Qing in Chang'an City, and his little handmaiden said that the prince was really beautiful, he seemed to be gentle at that time, but in fact, he was already unhappy. Moreover, because of the bloody battle in the meadow, Ning Ke did not have the slightest reverence for the Divine Hall now, but was extremely hostile. Therefore, killing 3 deacons of the judicial department of the Divine Temple was not much different from killing 3 gazelles for him. It did not cause any psychological impact, nor did it make him feel enlightened. He even had the mood to look at the pretty face of the girl. He looked at Mo Shanshan's innocent and helpless expression and subconsciously wanted to reach out to poke her cute pink cheeks. Suddenly, he remembered that she was a calligraphy addict, so he forcibly restrained his impulse and comforted her. He said, "I will dispose of the bodies later. I am very good at this, so no one will know about it." It was a pity that there was only one academy in the world, and only the academy could teach a student like Ning Quebec. Although Mo Shanshan was the world-famous calligraphy addict, she still could not smile at the Divine Hall's name and not care about it like him. Looking at the girl who was still silent with her head down, Ning Ke shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't forget what happened on the meadow. Your younger brother was actually killed by the judicial department of the Divine Hall, but they did not do it themselves. Therefore, from the most simple emotional level, you should not be biased towards them. You should treat those who are not good to you well. The Divine Hall is not good to you, but their life and death are not your business. You have never seen the desolate man before, so why did you help the Divine Hall to kill them? The desolate man came all the way from the south, and that elder sister did not kill you as if she saw a ghost. Instead, she gave you a piece of meat to eat, and now she is making meat soup for you. What do you call eating a piece of meat that has been preserved for thousands of years? This is called fate. Ning Ke raised his arm and patted her shoulder gently. He looked back into the tent and said with a smile, "Thank you, elder sister." The curtain was lifted, and the desolate woman came out with a bowl of meat soup and a few pieces of coarse grain cake. She looked at him and nodded with a smile, saying, "I should thank you for what happened last night." The desolate man had a special physique, and their skin was extremely hard. Last night, the deacon in black had injured the woman's shoulder with his Taoist sword, and the Haotian divine light attached to the wound was removed by Mo Shanshan's talisman, so it was not a big problem. The dark-skinned desolate boy hid behind the curtain and looked at the two young people from the Central Plains curiously. He asked, "You are all from the Central Plains. Why did you help us kill those people from the Central Plains?" Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and said righteously, "Because we are good people from the Central Plains." The desolate boy scratched his head in confusion, as if he did not understand what good people from the Central Plains meant. Before the southward migration, the senior statesman did not mention such a term when he convened the tribes for a meeting. Suddenly, he thought of something that the senior statesman had said. He suddenly realized something and patted his forehead. He looked at Ning Ke and said, "The senior statesman said that you people from the Central Plains like internal strife the most. Is this called internal strife?" Hearing this, Mo Shanshan could not help feeling a little hot on her cheek. She did not know how to respond. Ning Ke did not care at all. He laughed and patted the head of the desolate boy. Under Ning Ke's strong request and shameless insistence, he finally succeeded in getting the girl to join in the work of destroying the corpses. It was not because he had a perverted hobby of seeing the girl turn pale and tremble in front of the corpses, but because he increasingly felt that Mo Shanshan was really an inexperienced girl. Although she had such a great reputation in the world, she was still a quiet little flower by the Ink Lake who could not stand the wind and rain. If he did not let her grow up as soon as possible, he could not count on her to help him much on the way, and she might even drag him down. In his life experience, disposing of the corpses was the second fastest way to help an ignorant girl grow up as soon as possible. As for the best way, he hoped that he would never think of it again in this life. The big black horse angrily carried the heavy luggage and dragged countless things, accompanying the young man and woman to the woodland deep in the snowfield. Behind the tight leather rope, there was a complete corpse on the ground, two incomplete but no longer bleeding bodies, and a large bunch of stone grass used to cover the traces. Mo Shanshan walked in front silently. The hem of her cotton skirt had been wet by the snow, but she did not notice it, because she had not gotten rid of the complicated and confused emotions. The respect for Haotian and the Divine Hall, which had been deeply rooted in her blood since childhood, could not be easily erased by a few words. Although she felt that what Ning Ke had said seemed to be very reasonable, she still felt that something was wrong about this matter. For a girl who had meditated in the Ink Lake for more than 10 years and did not care about worldly affairs, the difficulty of changing her worldview was second only to changing her view of love. Looking at her back, Ning Ke felt a little helpless and a little tired. Walking on the desolate snowfield, his mind suddenly drifted back to Chang'an, which was relatively far away from the South Pole, to the shop in the alley, and to the little black handmaiden. He silently thought how simple it would be if it was Sang Sang, and Sang Sang would never doubt anything he said. Of course, Sang Sang's worldview, life, love, money, food, and life and death were all his views. A few fat tree rats vigilantly looked at the scene under the tree. There were several human corpses piled up in the naturally formed pit, and the faint smell of blood made them a little uneasy. Ning Ke threw the large bunch of stone grass dyed with snow into the pit, and looked at the black-robed deacon's pale but still serious face as he gently leaned against his right foot. After a moment of silence, he seriously said. The Divine Hall needs to be respected, and so does the Academy. The back of the mountain of the Academy has never been involved in the secular world, but since I came to the wilderness this time, it is equivalent to representing the face of the Academy. However, it seems that people do not respect me very much along the way. He turned to look at Emo Shanshan and said with a smile, "If my second brother was wanted by the judicial department of the Divine Hall, what do you think he would do? He definitely wouldn't be like me, who would just kill a few people." Emo Shanshan slightly frowned and thought of the extremely arrogant Mr. Second of the Academy. She said, "Then what would he do? Would he kill the Tao addict or Prince Longqing?" Of course, second brother would not do that. How could people like the Tao addict or Prince Longqing exist in his eyes? Ning Ke smiled and shook his head. He said, "According to my understanding of him, he might directly kill his way to the Peach Mountain and go to the judicial department to find trouble with the great divine priest. His idol is youngest uncle. If it were not for the strict master, I am afraid that he would have gone around to find trouble with others. How could he not take this opportunity to get angry?" Emo Shanshan stared at him and was speechless. She wondered what kind of weird people lived on the second floor of the Academy. "I don't have such strength and confidence. However, glory is my life. If anyone dares to ignore the existence of the Academy, I will not hesitate to fight with my little life." Ning Ke looked at the sky in silence. His tone was indescribably melancholy, with a hint of decisiveness. If a teardrop or snowflake could fall on his eyelashes at this time, the scene would be more handsome. Emo Shanshan had accompanied him all the way. Although they couldn't be said to be as close as old friends, she knew that this person was a bit of a rascal. At this moment, when she heard him suddenly say such sonorous and forceful words, she couldn't help but be moved. She seriously stared at his profile and silently thought for a long time. She was still not sure of her own judgment. She asked in a very low voice and not very confident, "Are you lying or joking?" Ning Ke laughed and looked at her. He said, "Since there is no reason to lie to you, of course it is a joke." Emo Shanshan slightly frowned, as if a precious purple fine blade was drawn on a piece of paper. She looked extremely dissatisfied. Ning Ke slightly stopped smiling and looked at her eyes. He seriously said, "But seriously, I have never thought that the Divine Hall is qualified to represent Haotian. Who can prove that Haotian allows them to be the representatives? Maybe we are the ones chosen by Haotian. We need to maintain the light and justice of the world. So if the Divine Hall does such disgusting things in the future, we must refuse to be indifferent and take action when it is necessary." He was still righteous, but this time Emo Shanshan was not fooled by him. She looked at his eyes and seriously thought for a long time again. Then she tried to confirm, "This should be a joke?" Ning Ke looked at her slightly wrinkled cute little nose and saw the confusion and nervousness in her dull eyes. He could not help but laugh happily. He took out a fu paper from his arms and said, "You can also say that it is a lie." Emo Shanshan looked at his back and suddenly asked, "Why do you like to lie?" Ning Ke did not turn around. He said, "It is a habit I developed when I was young. Sometimes I cannot survive without lying." Emo Shanshan continued to ask, "Then what is your purpose in coming to the wilderness? Why do you teach me those dark things? Why do you teach me how to kill people? Why do you let me get used to it?" The questions asked by simple people were very simple. Because they were simple and direct, they could pierce through countless hidden silk armors. For example, a joke or a lie, and directly hit the heart in the chest. These questions were not easy to answer. Ning Ke stood by the snow pit and thought for a while. He decided to answer honestly. He looked back at her and said calmly, "I want to go to the wilderness to do something important. I want to grab something important. As you said a few days ago, no one will care about my academy background when it comes to the critical moment of snatching food. At that time, not to mention whether I can snatch food from the tiger's mouth, anyone can beat me like a dog. Emo Shanshan looked at him quietly and waited for him to finish his words. Ning Ke flicked the fu paper into the snow pit and continued in a very serious tone, "So I need your help." Emo Shanshan slightly lowered her head and looked at an unknown place in the snow. After a moment of silence, she asked in a low voice, "What do you want to grab?" "One of the 7 tomes of arcane." Ning Ke looked at her slightly blinking long eyelashes and felt the emotional changes in her heart at this time. He said, "You agreed to go to the wilderness with me. I'm wondering if it has anything to do with this matter." Emo Shanshan slowly raised her head. After a long silence, she softly said, "My master told me after knowing about this. I don't expect to grab the tomes of arcane, but I'm very curious, so I want to come and have a look." Ning Ke smiled and said, "Curious about the tomes of arcane and the powerhouses who are qualified to grab the tomes of arcane?" Emo Shanshan smiled slightly. She felt relaxed and comfortable talking to him because he seemed to be able to hear what she was saying in her heart. He would never think of her in other ways. Ning Ke was about to say something. Emo Shanshan gently shook her head and looked into his eyes. She very seriously asked, "I didn't tell you, and you didn't tell me either. Then can we be considered even and not considered lying to each other?" This was a very simple way of thinking, which usually only existed in the world of pure children. But the girl said it naturally, so Ning Ke naturally accepted it and nodded seriously. He even felt relieved because he had very few friends in the world. He didn't want to inexplicably lose one. Then Ning Ke looked at her very seriously and said, "But your mentality is wrong. Since you and I have come to the wilderness, of course we can't miss the opportunity. So don't say that you don't dare to hope. If you don't even dare to think about it, then you really can't do anything." Emo Shanshan looked at him very seriously and asked, "Is this also a kind of education for me?" Ning Ke smiled a little embarrassedly and said, "Anyway, I have calculated that if we can cooperate well, even Prince Longqing may not be able to defeat us. Why don't we have a try?" Emo Shanshan smiled slightly and said, "Then let's have a try. But if we grab it, how will we divide it? We can make copies at that time. You can bring it back to the Ink Lake, and I will bring it back to the Academy. Speaking of which, I haven't seen the headmaster of the Academy yet. Snatching a tomes of arcane as a gift to my master, I feel very excited just thinking about it." The more Ning Ke said, the more excited he became. Emo Shanshan's eyes suddenly flashed a touch of shyness and she said, "I want the copy that you made." Ning Ke waved his hand and said generously, "You choose first." Standing in the snow, the two of them imagined a beautiful future with almost zero possibilities. They both laughed foolishly. Hung Heng, I wish the girls a happy holiday. Hung Heng, my most awesome point is that I can turn anything into a happy thing. Hung Heng, I wish the girls and the others a happy holiday. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 248. The silly smile seemed especially clean in the pure white snow forest, as if it could infect every snowflake on the branches and every blade of grass under the snow. However, the flame formed from the talisman paper in the snow pit in front of the two clearly did not have any infectious power. It did not grow larger even after being blown by the cold wind for a long time. Ning Ke looked at the small flame on the dead body of the Judicial Department's deacon and was a little embarrassed to find that there was such a big gap between his talisman Taoism ability and that of the young talisman master beside him. Last night, Emo Shanshan casually used a talisman to burn the Judicial Department deacon into ashes, but the black clothes were not damaged at all. Compared with this, the Fu fire that he painstakingly wrote in Chang'an City was completely weak. How many days would it take to burn the body into ashes? Emo Shanshan noticed the embarrassed expression on his face and almost couldn't hold back her laughter. She forced herself to lower her head to hide her smile. She flicked her fingers that were exposed outside her cotton sleeves, and the fire in the snow pit was suddenly ignited. Those almost blazing white flames appeared and disappeared in a flash. Ning-Kei stood beside the pit and didn't have time to feel the scorching temperature. He found that the snow in the pit melted into water and gradually seeped into the ground. The dead body of the Judicial Department deacon had disappeared, and this time the black heavy clothes were all burned. Ning-Kei looked at the scene in front of him and sighed. Talisman Taoism was about talent, and the use of talisman was about the use of talisman. His talisman writing was far less than that of the calligraphy addict. At this time, he couldn't even understand how the calligraphy addict did it, so he couldn't help feeling a little resentful. Master Yensei said that I'm a rare genius in talisman Taoism in 1,000 years. But after being with you for a long time, I always feel that he is deceiving me, or his vision is much worse than that of the master of calligrapher. He looked at Emo Shanshan's beautiful and clear eyes and confirmed that the girl should be about the same age as him. He was too embarrassed to ask her how old she was, so he shook his head and said with emotion, "You are the real genius in talisman Taoism." Emo Shanshan looked at him and seriously asked, "Senior Brother 13, when did you start to learn talisman Taoism?" Ning-Kei counted the days and replied, "In spring, almost half a year." Emo Shanshan quietly looked at his eyes. After a long time, she gently sighed and said, "In this case, Master Yensei's vision is really right. You are indeed a genius in talisman Taoism." Ning-Kei was very happy to hear this, especially when he thought of his daily bragging to Chun Pippi. He smiled and seriously asked, "Am I really strong?" Emo Shanshan nodded, and then she thought of something and curiously asked, "What kind of person he is of your teacher?" Ning-Kei thought for a while and answered honestly, "He's a dirty old man who's very lewd and lecherous." Emo Shanshan was slightly startled. She immediately understood something and said softly, "I'm asking the headmaster because I'm curious about what kind of person he is to be able to teach students like you on the second floor of the academy." Taoism young, Taoism Mo and he Taoism Taoist of him. Taoism Taoist, he said. Master of Taoism Taoist Mo of. Emo Shanshan's eyelashes fluttered, as if she hadn't expected to hear such an answer. Ning-Kei thought for a moment and said seriously, "But according to my understanding of the senior brothers and sisters on the second floor, I think the headmaster must be a very proud, arrogant, and great guy. In this world, only the guys in the back of the mountain of the academy dared to call the headmaster of the academy, Guy. As for his description, it was all nonsense. People like Emo Shanshan, the calligraphy addict, certainly knew that the headmaster of the academy was very great. How could a person as great as the headmaster of the academy not be proud? What kind of person is your master, the master of calligrapher?" Ning-Kei looked at her and asked curiously. Upon hearing her teacher's name, Emo Shanshan's expression became somewhat complicated. There was some reverence, some coldness, and some bewilderment. She slowly lowered her head and turned to walk out of the forest, indicating that she did not want to talk about this matter. Ning-Kei looked at the back of the cold and desolate figure in the snow-covered winter forest and frowned. He looked back at the snow pit and confirmed that the work of destroying the body was completed perfectly. Then he quickened his pace and chased after the figure. Its hooves stepped on the white snow. The big black horse carried the heavy luggage and walked with its head lowered. It looked at the two clear footprints on the snow in the forest and the silent young man and woman in front of the footprints. It was a little confused. It thought to itself, "When you came, you dragged the stone grass. Why did you not care about the footprints when you left?" Suddenly, the big black horse understood something and could not help but feel very annoyed. It shook its head angrily and galloped to the edge of the snow forest, just like before. Ning-Kei used a rope to tie the branches and dry firewood that the big black horse had brought from all over the place. He patted the horse's back with satisfaction, and took out the odd-looking grass from his arms, and stuffed it into the horse's mouth as a reward. Emo Shanshan looked at this scene curiously. She thought that the people from the second floor of the academy were strange. Even these animals were so strange. It was as if they could understand human nature. She did not know how they were taught. Ninkei said, "To remove the traces on the snowfield, Lord Haotian's snowstorm is of course the best way. If it doesn't snow, then we have to be careful. At least we can't take the same road when we came here and when we came back." Emo Shanshan asked confusedly, "I know that was the purpose of the grass. Then why did you burn it and make the big black search for branches everywhere?" Ning Kei explained calmly, "Because I wanted to try the power of the fire talisman I wrote. But I was not sure that it could burn very well. So I wanted to use the grass to help burn it. But it still didn't work. I still need your help." He was really shameless to be able to talk about his embarrassing story so calmly. But the big black horse, who suppressed its hoof and walked slowly behind them and at the same time swept the snow to remove the traces, became even sadder. Emo Shanshan did not care about the rascal in his words. After a moment of silence, she sighed softly and said, "I was raised by my teacher in the Ink Lake since I was a child. He never allowed me to touch the real world. If it weren't for the edict of the Divine Hall, and I'm really old, I might not have been able to leave the mountain." As Ninkei listened to the girl's gentle narration, he seemed to see a white-haired grand cultivator looking at a 5- or 6-year-old girl by the pool with a serious face, and sternly ordering her to calm down and write. Emo Shanshan looked at the vast mountains in the distance and said quietly, "The so-called 3 addicts in the world are obsessed with talisman Taoism, books, cultivation, and flowers. If they really want to enter the human world, how can they be a match for a clever person like you?" Ning Kei shook his head and said, "I'm not being humble. No matter how ruthless and realistic my methods are, I can't be a match for you. The state and strength can easily destroy all schemes." Emo Shanshan lowered her head and said softly, "I just suddenly understood one thing. I don't understand these worldly affairs. Lu Chenjiao is the same kind of person as me and doesn't necessarily understand either. If I was the one sitting in the horse carriage on the meadow that day and the people of Yueluan Kingdom were attacked by the horse gang, perhaps I wouldn't bother to care." Ning Kei looked at the strands of black hair floating around her round cheeks and said, "No, you are not the same kind of person as the flower addict. She is obsessed with flowers, so she can treat others like dirt and use them to grow flowers. Although you are obsessed with books, the world in your eyes is still a normal world. You don't use the blood of ordinary people like us as ink." Emo Shanshan felt that this description was very bloody, but it was also very appropriate. She raised her head and looked into his eyes quietly. She said seriously, "Am I really not the flower addict?" "Of course not." Ning Kei said with a smile, "Even if all of you are ignorant, you are kind and ignorant." Ignorance was not a bloody description, but it was also not appropriate. He believed that no one would like it. Emo Shanshan frowned slightly, but her bright eyes were filled with joy. She asked, "Is this a joke?" Ning Kei wanted to say that it was the truth, but looking at the beautiful and young face in front of him, he still nodded. Emo Shanshan turned around and did not say anything else. Her thin and red lips were tightly pressed together and her pink cheeks were slightly puffed up. She was not trying to suppress her anger, but trying to suppress her laughter. "It would be better if you are not a person who likes to lie. Of course, you are already very good now because you know how I feel, so you lied in the end." Emo Shanshan lowered her head and walked forward quietly. She thought about this sentence in her heart. Her feet stepped on the snow without leaving any traces. It was not intentional, but she felt that she was really floating. After returning to the tent, Ning Kei had a serious conversation with the desolate woman and asked her to do something. Therefore, the woman who participated in the winter ceremony and was not allowed to return to the tribe according to the rules of the desolate man, handed the child to the young man and woman from the Central Plains, and returned to the tribe by herself. After 2 days, the desolate woman came back with bad news. Ning Ke did not care, because he knew that it was extremely difficult to make the desolate man tribe believe that he was from the Central Plains. Fortunately, he still obtained some useful news, such as the caravan from Tuyang City and the recent events in the wilderness occupied by the desolate man tribe. After leaving the winter forest and heading north, the temperature became colder, especially when they might enter the northernmost foothills of Tianqi Mountain. Mo Shanshan's date Red Horse could not withstand the cold, so she left it to the desolate mother and son. After they said goodbye, the 2 people and the black horse continued their journey. Mo Shanshan asked, "What should we do next?" Ning Ke said, "Enter the mountain." Mo Shanshan was slightly stunned and asked, "Is the Tomes of Arcane in the mountain?" Ning Ke looked at the distant snow-capped peak, and said after a moment of silence, "I am not sure, but I am sure that the Divine Hall people are in the mountain." Due to the height of Tianhan Mountain, there were no plants here. The mountain wind was strong, and all the floating soil and snow were blown away, revealing the deep black rock surface below. On the edge of a protruding cliff between the black rock walls, a young man dressed in a black judicial department robe stood there. He looked at the leaden clouds and snow in the distance, as if he was about to melt into the rock walls. This place could not be reached by Goshawk, so it was not difficult for him. There was not even a trace of pride on that perfect but slightly pale face, because he was Prince Long Qing. Today, when I started writing and was about to get into the mood, I received a call. An old friend of many years, suddenly divorced. After telling me about this, my brain started to go blank and then became useless. I have been working on this for 6 or 7 hours, and I am really tired. Tomorrow is Saturday, but I took a leave a few days ago, so I will not rest tomorrow. See you all tomorrow. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 249. That night, how did you shoot those mounted bandits? It's simple. I used my psyche power to locate them in the dark. But how did you locate their vital parts? Psyche power. How did you do it from such a long distance? Because my psyche power is very strong. But you don't have a good aptitude for cultivation. The amount of chi of heaven and earth you can control is so little. Needles are not as heavy as knives, but they can still stab people. It's really a strange idea. And don't you think it's a waste to fight in this way? It consumes too much psyche power in the sense of perception to lock the opponent's position and figure. As I said before, my psyche power is very strong. Have you ever thought about becoming a psyche master? No. Why? Because I'm a genius in talisman Taoism. Of course I want to become a talisman master like you. That night when you killed the deacon of the Divine Hall, you didn't use a talisman. I'm used to using a knife. There are talismans carved on the knife. Your fighting style is really different from ordinary cultivators. I'm a genius. Of course I don't take the ordinary path. But why do I always feel that it's a forced choice? My pride has been hurt by you again. I won't lie. That's why you can hurt me. Do you feel that the chi of heaven and earth in the forest at the foot of the mountain is very rich? Yes, a little. You don't seem to care much about the aura between heaven and earth. I care more about the aura in my body. From the snow ridge of the wilderness to the foot of the Tsang Mountain, this kind of conversation kept happening between Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan. Sometimes Ning Ke's mind became a little confused. He always felt that he had returned to the back of the mountain of the academy or the old library, talking nonsense with the annoying guy Chin Pippi. The discussion in his eyes was nonsense, but it was very important to Mo Shanshan. This young heavenly son, who was obsessed with calligraphy and talisman, gradually deepened her understanding of Ning Ke's cultivation method through these conversations. Then, as the two of them got closer to the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain, Her expression became more and more worried, and a little lost and helpless. The two rested beside a tiny hot spring. Ning Ke looked at her slightly drooping eyelids and her long eyelashes resting on her fair skin. He thought of her emotional changes along the way and could no longer suppress the confusion in his heart. He asked seriously, "What are you worried about?" Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at Ning Ke silently, as if she was watching the most dazzling gem gradually being buried by the wind and sand. Her eyes were full of worry and worry. She said softly, "I'm worried that you will join the devil." Ning Ke was slightly startled and then laughed. Influenced by the novels in that world, because of his life experience in this world, and because of the open-minded environment of the academy, it was really difficult for him to instinctively resist and dislike the devil's doctrine. But he was a very realistic person. He understood that his thoughts might not be wrong, but if he really cultivated the devil's doctrine's cultivation method, it would definitely lead to countless troubles. He said with a smile, "I'm the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. Naturally, I can't be like those poor people who have been insulted and hurt but are unable to retaliate. I can't sell my soul to the devil for things like power or power." Mo Shanshan quietly looked at his clean and pleasant face. Thinking of what she had seen and heard along the way, she was more and more sure that he was a guy who did not care about the means to achieve his goals. She could not feel that he had the slightest fear for Haotian at all. And the cultivation method he chose now, whether passively or actively, was particularly focused on his own physical skills. He rarely studied how to communicate with the breath of heaven and earth. If he continued on this path, it would be easy to step into the wrong path. Especially now that he was getting closer and closer to the mountain that was abandoned by Haotian. Mo Shanshan reached out to pick up the snowflakes by the hot spring and gently blew them off. She expressionlessly looked at the black and white mountain range not far away. After a long silence, she said, "Can you promise me one thing?" Ning Ke asked, "What is it?" Mo Shanshan looked back at him and said seriously, "If you encounter the devil's doctrine's cultivation method in this mountain, don't learn it." Hearing this, Ning Ke could not help but be stunned. He looked at the desolate mountain range that stretched between heaven and earth in the distance. He thought that he had heard from the desolate man's tribe that people from the Divine Hall had entered this mountain and guessed that it had something to do with the tomes of Arcane. Why did Mo Shanshan suddenly mention the devil's doctrine's cultivation method? Mo Shanshan's eyelashes fluttered slightly and she softly said, "The front gate of the devil's doctrine is in this mountain range that was abandoned by Haotian. However, the mountain is so vast that not many people know where it is except for the senior sublime being who destroyed the front gate." Ning Ke gradually digested the shock in his heart. He frowned and looked at the mountain range. After a moment of silence he said, "I really don't know about this. No one told me about it. The information given to me by the desolate man's tribe was very clear. The people from the Divine Hall snuck into the wilderness to cause trouble to attract the attention of the powerhouses of the desolate man and the senior patriarch society. The real powerhouses of the Divine Hall had all snuck into this mountain. The information given to me by Chang and was that the Divine Hall wanted to find the tomes of Arcane, and they thought that the tomes of Arcane was in the desolate man's tribe. That was why I was a little curious as to why they would enter the mountain." He withdrew his gaze and looked at Mo Shanshan with a frown. He said, "If the Divine Hall thought that the tomes of Arcane was still in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine had always been in Tianqi Mountain, then why didn't the people from the Divine Hall come to find the tomes of Arcane before? Why did they only come to look for it when the desolate man was heading south?" Mo Shanshan shook her head and used her fingers to tuck the fluttering strands of hair behind her ears. She said, "Once an otherworldly item like the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane appears in the world, it must respond to the heavenly secret. This is not an opportunity that you and I can understand or guess. However, in my opinion, The possibility of the tomes of arcane being in the desolate man's tribe is certainly not as high as the front gate of the devil's doctrine. Ning Ke asked, why? Mo Shanshan answered, because things like the tomes of arcane should originally be in the unknown place. The conversation in the sparse forest at the foot of the mountain constantly shocked Ning Quebec. He vaguely remembered that he should have heard of the unknown place, but he could not remember what it was about. He asked seriously, what is the unknown place? Mo Shanshan was stunned and realized that he was not joking. She answered seriously, it is a place that people can't reach. Ning Ke rubbed his eyebrows and said helplessly, can you be more specific? Mo Shanshan frowned and looked at him as if she was looking at a very strange tree. After a moment of silence, she said, the unknown place refers to those mysterious places outside the secular world. Very few people can see these places with their own eyes. Even those who have been there will not talk about it after they come out. Therefore, for thousands of years, only some legends about the unknown place have been circulating in the cultivation world. Ning Ke did not explain further. He said, if the divine hall is not counted as the unknown place, then I think the devil's doctrine is just a branch of the divine hall. Why is its front gate called the unknown place? Upon hearing this question, Mo Shanshan answered very seriously, when I was young, I once asked my teacher. According to my teacher, it is because the great divine priest of light who founded the devil's doctrine had already become an unparalleled demon who surpassed the 5 states when he established the front gate of the devil's doctrine. That is why there is such a saying. Surpassed the 5 states? Ning Ke thought of the legendary sages that Elder Lu Qingchen had told him about. Those terrifying great states of Tianqi and Limitless made his mind shake. He felt that those unknown places were so far away and untouchable. Apart from the abandoned front gate of the devil's doctrine, I believe that there must be the existence of powerhouses who surpassed the 5 states in other unknown places. However, these powerhouses are few in number and basically do not appear in the world. Only a young disciple will appear in the human world every few years and is called the World Wayfarer. Once these World Wayfarer appear in the human world, they are grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state. Even Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword, the strongest powerhouse in the world in the South Jin Kingdom, will be afraid of them. Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Ke with a very complicated look. The message in her eyes seemed to be saying that what she had just said was not the same as what she had seen with her own eyes. Therefore, she was not confident. Ning Ke did not notice the look in her eyes. He was still immersed in the shock brought by these secrets of the cultivation world. He recalled his daily life in the back of the mountain of the academy and became more and more angry that second brother, third sister, and Chen Pippi did not even tell him such an important thing. He frowned and said, if things like the tomes of arcane can only exist in the unknown places, then those who are qualified to snatch the tomes of arcane should be those world wayfarer from the unknown places. I originally thought that I might encounter competitors at most at the level of the Tao Addict or Long Qing, so I could always compete with them. However, if I encounter those grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, it seems that I can't compete with them. For some reason, Mo Shanshan felt that she completely did not understand what this guy was trying to say. She frowned and asked, what on earth are you thinking about? Ning Ke looked at her and said very sincerely and honestly, I am thinking if we should go back to the south immediately. If you are not happy about it, I can take you to Chang, an city to play and eat osmanthus cake. Mo Shanshan opened her eyes wide and looked at him inexplicably. She did not know what to say. Ning Ke did not know what to say either. He fell into a long silence and thought. It was really a bit inexplicable that the trip to the wilderness had developed to the present situation. Big events jumped in front of him one after another, and no one had warned him in advance. Even such important news as the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane was not told to him until the last moment. No matter how he looked at it, this kind of response and planning ability did not match the reputation of the Tang Empire and the Academy. His Majesty and the nation. Master Li Qingshan would not harm him, and Master Yen Sei would not harm him either. His senior brothers and sisters in the Academy might not be involved in this matter, but if it involved the unknown places, he did not believe that second brother would not have any interest in it. But why did these guys let him come without saying anything? As a guy who participated in the practice for the first time in the history of the second floor of the Academy, His Majesty and the elders in the South School might have other ideas. But what was second brother thinking? Ning Ke became more and more lost in thought. His eyes gradually brightened, and then suddenly dimmed as if he was suffering from some kind of horror. His body became very stiff. That was because he remembered a passage that went like this: Fate itself is a very cruel fellow. If it wants to choose you to undertake a mission, then before it is sure that you are able to undertake this mission, it will do everything it can to break every bone in your body, strip every bit of your flesh, and make you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your will and temperament be strong enough to qualify to be chosen by fate. This passage was told to him by Chen Pippi. This passage was told to Chen Pippi by second brother. This passage was told to him by the legendary youngest uncle. Everyone in the back of the mountain of the Academy knew that second brother was the most brainless follower of youngest uncle and the most fanatical fan. He wanted to be close to youngest uncle no matter in words, deeds or style of doing things. Thinking of the famous words of youngest uncle, second brother threw Ning Ke into the vast wilderness and let him, a weak person in the no-doubt state, face many powerhouses in the divine hall, world wayfarers from the unknown place, and face a miserable life. Then he got the answer. Ning Ke could not help but shiver. He looked at the mountain innocently and helplessly like a drowning child. In his heart, he had already cursed second brother and called him the ancient crown on his head, a wooden club. At this time, the big black horse went somewhere to fill its stomach, and slowly walked back with resentment in its eyes. Ning Ke looked at the big black horse and thought of its insufferably arrogant performance in the royal court horse race. He gradually calmed down the fear and uneasiness in his heart. He frowned and thought for a long time and suddenly asked, "Is the result more important or the process?" Emo Shanshan was slightly startled and answered, "I think it's the process." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I used to think it was the result. Later, when I comprehended talisman, I thought it was the process that mattered. Now I understand that both are equally important. But without the process, there is no result." Emo Shanshan said, "You are not a person who is used to saying such things." Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly laughed. He said, "Because I have confirmed my purpose of coming to the wilderness." "What is it?" "It has nothing to do with the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and the front gate of the devil's doctrine. The reason I came to the wilderness in the beginning was to participate in the Academy's practice. The purpose of those Academy students' practice is to march and fight, and my purpose of practice is naturally to cultivate." Ning Ke said in a very affirmative tone, "The Academy let me come to the wilderness, hoping that I can understand something in this process. This is the process, and breaking the state into the see-through state is the purpose of this cultivation journey." Emo Shanshan slowly raised her eyebrows and said incredulously, "You understood it at the beginning of spring, felt it at the end of spring, and then the no-doubt state. Do you want to break the state into the see-through state in less than a year?" Ning Ke said seriously, "I have told you before that I am not far from the see-through state." Emo Shanshan gently shook her head and said, "Wang Jinglu of the Tang dynasty entered the see-through state at the age of 16, but he was enlightened at the age of 4. I entered the see-through state at the age of 14, but I was enlightened at the age of 3. I don't know about the Tao addict, but Prince Long Qing entered the see-through state at a younger age, but I believe he also spent a long time. I have never heard of anyone who entered the see-through state within a year. Even if you are the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, you have not even seen the headmaster of the academy. This idea is really... Ning Ke smiled and thought, that is because you have not stayed in the back of the mountain of the academy. There are too many freaks in cultivation there. However, except for second brother, the rest of the senior brothers and senior sisters seem not to be interested in cultivation. If they put their obsession with chess, zither, flowers and other miscellaneous things into cultivation, they might have already entered the knowing destiny state. Thinking of the great senior brothers and senior sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy, Ning Ke regained his confidence. Looking at the vast snow mountains, he was full of pride and said loudly, "Are world wayfarers so great?" Hearing this, Mo Shanshan's thin red lips slightly opened, but she could not say a word. She thought with a complicated and angry expression, "How could I fall in love with such a stupid person in the summer by the Ink Lake?" Ning Ke looked at her speechless expression and laughed proudly. He said, "Don't be shocked, don't admire me. I am a person chosen by God who dares to face the bleak life, cruel fate, dripping blood and countless dangers." Prince Long Qing stood between the black rock walls, tired of the dark clouds in front of him and the flying snow in the distance. He looked back at the deep desolate and deep mountain range. This mountain range was originally the end of the northern foot of Min Mountain, but it was called Tianqi Mountain Range in the language of grassland barbarians and the records of the Divine Hall. After the great divine priest of light betrayed the Divine Hall and founded the Devil's Doctrine, he led his followers to build the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in this mountain range. From that day on, this mountain range eroded by filth was abandoned by Haotian. A small snowflake was brought from the cliff to his face by the wind, but it could not touch his beautiful face and flew away, which made him gradually frown. After 1,000 years, another great divine priest of light betrayed the Divine Hall. He did not know what kind of stain it would bring to the glory of Haotian and what kind of damage it would cause to the cause of the Divine Hall. Although he was the God's favored one who was cultivated by the Divine Hall and was the perfect Son of God in the eyes of the world, he was still young and inexperienced. Above him were the Tao Addict Yi Hong Yu, the great divine priest of judgment, and the hierarch lord. He was not qualified to participate in the betrayal of the great divine priest of light and could only think about it. The great divine priest of light destroyed the confinement, left the Yu prison, and betrayed the Peach Mountain, which made the West Hill Divine Palace fall into great chaos. Almost at the same time, the great divine priest of revelation who returned from the south sent a Haotian edict at the cost of half of his hair turning white. Sensing the desolate man's southward movement, the filthy unknown place in Tianqi Mountain reappeared after decade. The Divine Hall had never given up looking for the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane lost in the wilderness. After the madman split the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine into ruins with a single sword, it was said that someone from Haotian Taoism had personally searched for it once, but found nothing. Therefore, the Divine Hall had always thought that the tomes of arcane had been taken to the cold region of the far north by the desolate man. However, at this time, the great divine priest of revelation issued such an edict. Prince Long Qing's frown deepened. It did not affect his handsome face, but it looked a little serious. The front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was the only unknown place that had been destroyed. Once it was reopened, many things would definitely be found. Those things were probably no different from garbage to the madman and the person who went to search for the tomes of arcane. But for the Tao addict and other young cultivators in the world, they were very precious. He believed in Haotian fervently and yearned for the light. Naturally, he would not be interested in those filthy and dark Devil's Doctrine skills. But after all, he was the priest of the judicial department and knew some historical truths that had been annihilated by time. He thought that even if he could not find the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane, if he could inherit the mantle of the madman, this trip would be very meaningful. But how much lucky chance did it require? Prince Longqing looked at the mountain that had been abandoned by Haotian and said calmly, "This is also a kind of cultivation." Dozens of feet below the cliff, a deacon of the judicial department dressed in black appeared. The deacon humbly bowed to Prince Longqing and then said a few words. His voice was blown intermittently by the cold wind between the mountains. Ordinary people could not hear it, but it was very clear in Prince Longqing's ears. All the masters of the divine hall had come out. The powerhouses of the desolate man's tribe and even a few elders of the senior statesman's society had been attracted to the west. The Tianqi mountain in the east now seemed very empty, but there are 3 deacons missing? Prince Longqing looked at the subordinate under the cliff expressionlessly. It seemed that he was simply asking, without the slightest emotion. Only he himself knew that when he heard the name of the deacon, he was a little annoyed. One of the 3 missing deacons was called Luo Weiyang, who was at the lower stage of the see-through realm. He was a very capable subordinate of Prince Longqing. But this was not a big deal. The important thing was that he was Luo Kadi's brother. Luo Kadi himself was not a big deal. The important thing was that he was the most favored commander of the divine guards of the hierarch lord. Because of his gloomy expression, the subordinate under the cliff became more and more nervous. He lowered his head and continued to report, "Mr. 13 from the 2nd floor of the academy has also left the palace. He should be coming here. The specific route is unknown. I only know that he should be traveling with the calligraphy addict from the Black Ink Garden." Prince Longqing slowly raised his sword-like eyebrows and a faint smile appeared on his face. He said to himself, "It's a little interesting. He has actually begun to travel around the world. But has there ever been a world wayfarer as weak as you in the past 1,000 years?" Then his smile gradually faded and turned into frost as the cold wind brushed against his cheeks. As a young powerhouse who was absolutely qualified to be proud, Prince Longqing had only lost to Ning Ke once in his life. So after hearing Ning Ke's name, his pride naturally turned into anger and displeasure. Although he hid it very well and was still calm and peaceful, from climbing the mountain in spring to climbing the mountain in the harsh winter today, no one in the divine hall could see it. But he knew that the anger and displeasure had always been there. When he left Chang'an in spring, thanks to that failure, he saw the threshold of the knowing destiny state waiting for him on the other side of the mountain. But it was also because of that failure that he saw the threshold on the other side of the mountain. He had no way to get close to it, let alone cross it. Anger and displeasure would not have an essential impact on the Taoist heart. But the hidden unwillingness and imbalance were definitely the greatest damage to the clarity of the Taoist heart. He was very proud, so he was unwilling. He did not dare to question the headmaster's choice, but he believed that the academy examination was not presided over by the headmaster himself. So there must be other reasons why he lost to Ningquebec. Because he could not be worse than Ningquebec. To prove this, he needed to defeat or even destroy that guy in all aspects. The great divine priest of judgment had said so. The hierarch had not said so, but his cold eyes had said so before he left. Yi Hongyu, that crazy woman, had also said so with her scornful smile. So he knew he had to do this. "I'll wait for you in this mountain." Prince Longqing looked at the black and lowly stones at the foot of the snow-capped peak and said with a self-mocking smile, "I'm about to become the first person in history to defeat a world wayfarer. Why don't I feel any sense of accomplishment?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 250. Hatred, unwillingness, anxiety, and fear were the most terrible mental obstacles for cultivators. They were like pieces of firewood, suspended beside the Taoist heart and became a fence, blocking the fresh wind and water outside the fence. If this situation lasted for too long, things inside the fence would gradually wither. Prince Longqing's failure to reach the back of the mountain of the academy was the first hurdle on his road. Ning Ke was the firewood outside Prince Longqing's Taoist heart. One of the important purposes of his cultivation in the wilderness was to remove this firewood. There were many ways to break the fence of the Taoist heart, such as penance, understanding the classics, or forcing oneself into a desperate situation. But there was no doubt that the simplest way was to chop the firewood into sawdust and blow it away with the wind. So when Prince Longqing knew that the firewood called Ning Ke had come by itself, and that the fence outside his Taoist heart could be broken, his Taoist heart, which was covered by dust, gradually brightened. He felt a gush of open air gushing out from his chest and abdomen, and he wanted to roar at the vast mountains like the sea. At this moment, the world in his eyes was different. The aura of heaven and earth flowed slowly between the snow-capped peaks and the black rocks, and the rich and complicated flowing law seemed to be grasped. A door appeared in the clear air between the big mountains in the distance, and it was much clearer than before. Push open the door and cross the threshold, and you would know your destiny. Prince Longqing clasped his hands behind his back and looked at that place with passion. He was silent for a long time. After a long time, he slowly withdrew his gaze and looked at a snow tree beside him. As far as his eyes could see, the snow on the branches gradually turned into water. The water droplets wet the dead branches and gathered on the branches, and then condensed into a crystal water droplet, which quickly turned into ice in the cold mountain wind. In the process of the water droplet freezing, it seemed that there was a wonderful knife in the wind, which did not condense the water droplet into a circle or an oval, but gradually opened, peeling off one by one until it took shape. It was a crystal and transparent peach blossom, but it gave people a feeling of fresh and beautiful. The colorless pure water was ice, but it seemed to show colors visually, which was very magical. Prince Longqing quietly looked at the ice peach blossoms swaying gently in the wind. There was no pride or satisfaction on his beautiful face. Instead, there was a touch of self-mockery between his handsome eyebrows. He softly sighed and said, "Only half a minute left." In the spring, he returned to the West Hill from the Tang Empire. In the carriage leaving Chang'an, he once thought that he was about to enter the knowing destiny state, and that he might even complete it during the journey. However, what happened later made him wake up from this emotion, and then he calmly returned to cultivation. On the long road of cultivation, there was no turning back once one stepped on it. At the beginning, it was extremely fast, but the further one went, the more dangerous it became. The knowing destiny threshold that separated the grand cultivators from the ordinary cultivators was even more towering and extremely difficult to climb. Although he had already seen it, he did not know how long it would take for him to approach and cross it. However, Prince Longqing did not feel depressed because he was still very young, and he had already seen the threshold. Compared to those people who had cultivated for hundreds of years but still did not know where the treasure mountain was, he had enough right to be proud, especially at this moment. He knew that he had moved closer to that threshold. When it came to breaking the realm, every step forward was so difficult, so every step forward was so touching and even intoxicating. The snow on dozens of bare branches of the winter tree had all melted, and all the snow flowed to the branches, condensing into crystal-clear peach blossoms, reflecting the light from the sky, so beautiful that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Prince Longqing stretched out his jade-like right hand from his black sleeve and gently pinched an ice peach blossom with 3 fingers. He held it in the air and looked at it against the sun for a long time, and then softly sighed, "Longqing, you are really strong." At this moment, a clear and childish voice suddenly sounded in the distance, full of surprise and curiosity. "Are you people from the Central Plains all so thick-skinned?" Prince Longqing stopped smiling and looked in that direction with no expression on his face. On the cliff of the covered snow mountain stood a young girl with a childish face. The girl was tightly wrapped in a lot of ragged fur, wearing a pair of dirty old black boots and a leather hat on her head. Her black and beautiful hair was braided into a long and thick braid, hanging between her knees and swaying constantly. A furry beast's tail covered most of her face, but it could not cover the childishness between her eyebrows. Prince Longqing did not sense the fluctuation of psyche power from the girl, and slightly raised his eyebrows, thinking that if she was an ordinary person, how could she appear in the bone-chilling Tianqi mountain, and why did he not notice her? He thought of a possibility, and asked with a slightly cold gaze, "The desolate man returning to the south?" The girl looked no more than 15 or 16 years old, and her little face was stimulated by the cold wind blowing between the mountains, and her little face was red. Hearing his question, she nodded hard and then said, "I am Tang Xiaotang, and you?" Prince Longqing did not answer, but looked at the white furry beast beside the girl, frowned and asked, "A rabbit?" Tang Xiaotang shook her head and said, "Not a rabbit, a cute little white wolf." Prince Longqing did not want to say anything more to the desolate girl, and his fingertips gently turned the ice peach blossom, ready to let her return to Haotian's divine kingdom. The little snow wolf that had been quietly squatting by Tang Xiaotang's side suddenly stood up with its front paws on the ground. It bared its teeth and howled warily at him. But the snow wolf was too small. Even though the snow-white fur on its body stood up, it only looked like a bigger snowball. It was incomparably cute. How was it the least bit scary? Prince Longqing thought of the white horse given to him by his fiancée, and suddenly smiled. He thought that when he killed the desolate girl later, he could not hurt this rare little snow wolf. She would definitely like it if he gave it to her. Tang Xiaotang did not feel uneasy because of the little snow wolf's vigilance, and her black eyes were full of smiles. She looked at Prince Longqing and asked, "Do you want to kill me?" In the vast snow-capped mountains, where there was no sign of human habitation, a cute girl of 15 or 16 years old faced a strange man who had the intention to kill her, and asked him smilingly if he wanted to kill her. She did not show any fear at all, so there could only be two situations. Either she was a silly girl, or she was the real scary person. Prince Longqing's lips curled up slightly, and he laughed at himself. He thought that there had been such a situation in those boring and even rotten novels. He believed that this desolate girl might be a little strange, but there had never been a girl in this world who could threaten him at such a young age. As he thought of this, an extremely bright red appeared in front of him, like a koi fish wagging its tail in a lake. That red appeared a few years ago, and represented a past that made him feel extremely unhappy. Because of this memory, he became a little agitated, and his face gradually darkened. His beautiful face gradually turned into an ice peach blossom between his fingers. He looked at Tang Xiaotang expressionlessly and said, "I have killed many remnants of the devil's doctrine, but I have not killed the remnants of the devil's doctrine among the desolate men migrating to the south. Little girl, you should feel honored." Tang Xiaotang giggled, and stretched her little hand behind her back. She looked at Prince Longqing, who was under a tree in the distance, and said happily, "I have killed many animals like wolves and sheep, but I have not killed anyone from the divine hall. You should feel honored." Her soft laughter represented contempt, and contempt represented provocation. In Prince Longqing's view, a provocation to him was a provocation to the divine hall, and disrespectful to Haotian. So he became angrier, but his expression became calmer. No matter how he looked at it, this was definitely a one-sided battle. It was more like an adult bullying a little girl. However, unexpectedly, the first one to attack was the little girl wrapped in tattered animal skin. Tang Xiaotang did not attack with her hands. It was her feet. She stepped on the snow, and a deep footprint appeared on the snow. It was so deep that it seemed to be going into the ground. However, her seemingly ordinary black and dirty boot was only slightly deformed, and did not break. Then, Tang Xiaotang began to run toward the winter tree full of ice peach blossoms. Every time she stepped on the snowy ground, a large snowflake would be stirred up. It was as if her small body was a heavy mountain, causing the entire cliff to tremble slightly. The crystal-clear ice peach blossoms were shaken and fell from the branches to the ground. Tang Xiaotang came with the blizzard. Prince Longqing's pupils shrank slightly. His right hand, which hung outside his black Taoist robe, shook slightly. The falling ice peach blossoms were stimulated by the fluctuation of the primordial qi between heaven and earth. They whizzed through the air like countless feathered arrows, and instantly arrived in front of Tang Xiaotang. These crystal-clear ice peach blossoms reflected beautiful light under the sunlight, and set up layers of obstacles between the cliff. The seemingly fragile petals contained an extremely powerful force. The cold wind blew against Tang Xiaotang's blushing face, and the beast's tail that covered her face made a whistling sound. Her speed was too fast, so fast that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. No one knew how such a small and skinny body could contain such a huge amount of energy, and no one could imagine how her slender legs could not be broken under such speed. Because of the speed, when the beautiful and terrifying ice peach blossoms appeared in front of her, they were already very close to her young face, and it was impossible for her to avoid them at her current speed. Tang Xiaotang had learned how to fight from her brother since she was a child, and did not know what avoidance was. When she ran at a high speed, her right hand had been stretched out behind her. At this time, looking at the sky full of ice peach blossoms, she finally pulled it out. She pulled out a huge blood-red scimitar. This scimitar was ridiculously large, and especially when compared with her thin body, it looked especially terrifying. The blade was redder than blood, and no one knew where this scimitar had been hidden in her body. The blood-red huge scimitar slashed down from the sky, making a whistling sound. The transparent ice peach blossoms cracked with the sound, and shattered into pieces of ice all over the ground. Prince Longqing's Taoist magic was naturally not so simple. When the transparent ice peach blossoms shattered, an extremely powerful qi of heaven and earth surged out from the ice peach. However, at this time, Tang Xiaotang had already run more than 100 feet away, and had already split open the fifth ice peach blossoms. After the peach blossoms split open, they turned into useless ice gravel and fell to the ground. The Taoist magic contained in the peach blossoms set off countless air waves between the cliffs, and shook up the snow and black rock. However, it could not catch up with Tang Xiaotang's speed, and could only serve as a foil to the little girl's momentum, which made her look so dispirited and useless. The blood-red huge scimitar in Tang Xiaotang's small hand split open 1 peach blossoms, 2 peach blossoms, and 3 peach blossoms. Then it slashed in front of Prince Longqing. Prince Longqing's eyes suddenly brightened, and he gently pushed the ice peach blossoms in his right hand forward, blocking the blade of the blood-red huge scimitar. The transparent petals instantly bloomed, extremely flourishing. The sharp blade, the seemingly fragile ice peach blossoms. Once they met, it was better than countless things in the human world. Between the snow cliffs, the qi of heaven and earth shook violently. The winter tree that had just borne countless peach blossoms was torn into pieces by the turbulence in the air. Prince Longqing snorted softly, but did not take a step back. But the band that tied his black hair suddenly broke, and his black hair fell down like a waterfall, making him look a little embarrassed. His pale right hand that was holding the ice peach blossoms trembled slightly. An extremely tiny crack appeared on the ice peach blossoms between his fingers. Tang Xiaotang, like a nimble bird, stepped lightly on the smoke, and flipped back, landing lightly on the snow. She giggled and looked at Prince Longqing, whose black hair was messy. She said, "You're really pretty, just like those girls from the Great River Kingdom in embroidery books, but you don't look like you can fight very well." Prince Longqing stared at the desolate girl, and used a lot of strength to calm his teeth, that kept trembling because of anger. A stream of blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. It was as bright as the stamens of the peach blossoms. His black hair slowly fluttered on Prince Longqing's beautiful but pale face. His eyes were unusually focused and cold, and his hands that were exposed outside his black sleeves trembled slightly. The small crack on the peach blossoms had disappeared, and the divine sword that the hierarch had given to him at his waist began to gently buzz. Tang Xiaotang looked at him and scratched her head. She said, Your state is very high, but you really can't fight. Your peach blossoms are very interesting, better than your sword. If you want to fight head-on with my scimitar, you have to use the sword on your hierarch's waist. If you abandon the peach blossoms and use the sword now, you will only die faster. Prince Longqing slowly wiped the blood stains from the corner of his mouth, and looked at her with a faint smile. He said, "I can try." Suddenly, a strange look appeared in Tang Xiaotong's clear eyes. It wasn't fear, nor was it excitement. Instead, it was as if she had sensed that something strange and vexing was approaching. "I don't have time to try today. I have something to do and have to go first." Tang Xiaotong looked at Prince Longqing and said, "But I have to remind you that this mountain belongs to my family. If I see people from the Divine Hall again, I will kill them one by one." Prince Longqing also sensed the aura that was rushing at a high speed from afar. He could not help but frown and felt extremely annoyed. He stared at Tang Xiaotong and said in a low voice, "Do you think you can leave today? For the third time you said you can't fight." Tang Xiaotong looked at him and said sympathetically, "The disciples of the Enlightenment doctrine are best at running. Unless you enter the knowing destiny state, how can you catch up with me? Doesn't the Divine Hall teach these things now?" A very clear voice came from afar, "Tang Xiaotong, don't run if you can." Hearing that voice, Tang Xiaotong could not help but shiver. She replied angrily in a loud voice, "Yi Hongyu, you crazy woman. Don't be a hooligan if you can." Then she turned around and ran with the little white wolf. She ran faster than the wind. Please vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 251. Even if those devout Haotian believers were kowtowing around the Divine Hall and the Peach Mountain, there was always a direction. However, there was no treasure map in this story. There was no map in the Bloody Cloth. There was only the imperial court, which threw the heavy responsibility onto Ning Kei's shoulders and the completely irresponsible second brother. Thus, Ning Kei's trip to the wilderness became a tangled and frustrated journey in the end. In his view, if this journey was cultivation, then those guys who were warming themselves around the fire in the warm room of the imperial palace in Chang'an were all old men. It was so infuriating that he didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to say or how to walk. In the first few days after entering the north of Tianqi Mountain, Ning Kei and Mo Shanshan walked in silence and boredom. He perfectly played his hunting skills, but still couldn't overcome the difficulties brought by a night of strong north wind and heavy snowflake. When they reached a mountain valley where the cold wind was especially strong, Ning Kei pretended not to see the frowning black eyebrows of the young talisman master and forced her to give another warm talisman. When he was about to move forward, he suddenly stopped and looked up. Mo Shanshan looked at his expression and thought that he probably saw some snow mountain sheep and couldn't help but want to shoot it for dinner. She couldn't help but gently shook her head. She just felt the warmth coming from her abdomen and didn't say anything. Ning Kei didn't take out his bow to hunt. Instead, he slowly frowned and sat down in the snow. He closed his eyes and released the psyche power from his sense of perception out of his body. He began to sit quietly and feel the aura of heaven and earth around him. The cold wind blew the snow over, and soon a thin layer of snow had accumulated on his clothes. Mo Shanshan looked at him and was a little worried and confused. She wanted to reach out and brush the snow off for him, but in the end she did not move. Just at that moment, Ning Kei felt a familiar aura coming from the depths of Tianqi Mountain. With his current state, it was impossible for him to perceive things from such a long distance. However, that aura suddenly appeared in his sense of perception, which meant that it wasn't him who perceived that aura, but the aura in the depths of Tianqi Mountain ignored the thousands of miles of snow and took the initiative to find him. This analysis shocked him and made him speechless. He thought to himself, what kind of grand cultivator's state was that he could let me perceive his existence from such a long distance? Could it be the legendary limitless state? Could it be that there really was a sage-like existence in this vast mountain that surpassed the 5 states? In order to make sure that his perception was not wrong, he sat down without hesitation and began to close his eyes to meditate. With the concentration of his spiritual force and the release of the psyche power in his sense of perception, the breath coming from afar became clearer and clearer, like snowflakes in the wind crossing thousands of mountains, gently falling on his body, covering his clothes, and slowly and unstoppably seeping into his cheeks, mouth, and nose. An unimaginably terrifying aura of a powerhouse came from afar and instantly occupied one's sense of perception. In the face of such a situation, even a person like the Tao addict would have the first thought in his mind to avoid it. Ning Ke did not flee. Instead, he sat down and sensed quietly. Just as he had said before, this terrifying and powerful aura felt very familiar to him, even close to him. However, the problem was that no matter how hard he tried, he could not recall meeting a grand cultivator with such an aura in the past 2 years. The aura was strong but not overbearing. Although it was not overbearing, it was extraordinarily proud. It was like a cedar that lived stubbornly on the top of the snow-capped peak, covered with thousands of years of snow, but refused to bend its waist, overlooking all living beings under the peak, and disdainfully looking at the sky. Ning Ke closed his eyes and quietly felt the smell in the aura. Suddenly, a bright light flashed, and a lot of pictures suddenly appeared in his sense of perception. They were the beautiful and calm meadow in front of the academy, the countless books in the old library that disdained to be understood by the world, the proud white goose feeding fish in the back mountain, the ancient crown on the head of second brother, the flower that 11th brother stared at in a daze, and the forest at the foot of the mountain of the academy that pointed straight to the sky like a sword. He slowly opened his eyes and looked into the distant mountains, feeling the calmness and persistence contained in the aura. He did not know why his heart ached and he almost shed tears, because the familiar aura had the master's pride and persistence, but there was no information. It found him only because it also felt that he had a very familiar smell. It did not want to continue to stay in this mountain, it wanted to return to the place it was most familiar with. It wanted to go home, to go back to the academy. When Ning Ke woke up, the wind and snow had stopped, and there was a very thick layer of snow on his body. He silently looked over there for a long time, understanding some things, and also determined some things. He suddenly asked, "Did you feel that aura?" Thick snowflakes rustled down along his clothes. Emo Shanshan had been silently guarding by his side, not knowing what had happened to him. Hearing his question, she slowly frowned and shook her head, saying, "I didn't feel anything." Ning Ke stood up, patted off the snow on his clothes, and carried the heavy luggage, saying, "Let's go." Emo Shanshan asked, "Where to?" Ning Ke pointed to the distant mountains where the strong and proud aura came from, and said, "Go there." Emo Shanshan said, "We don't have a map." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "The people in Chang asked me to come here, because they know that I don't need a map." The snow road was difficult, but it was as difficult as climbing up to the sky. Ning Ke, who was determined, took the calligraphy addict, who had always been determined, and walked in that direction. It didn't take them too long to reach a steep cliff. It took them half a day to climb over the steep cliff. The two stood on the snow cliff, and a gust of wind blew against their faces. It was warm and cool, not like the cold winter wind, but like spring. The snow cliff was very long and the two walked along it. After a while, they found the source of the spring wind. At the end of the snow cliff was a large and deep valley. It was not because of the geothermal heat or the hot spring, but because of a green broad-leaved forest. The valley was not big, and it was full of green broad-leaved trees. It was a sharp contrast with the cold white and black world on the snow cliff. Emo Shanshan was stunned by the greenery in front of her eyes. After a long silence, she subconsciously looked back at Ning Ke because this was the direction he had pointed. She could not understand how Ning Ke could know what kind of valley was in the depths of the Tianqi Mountains. At the very beginning, he had been so troubled because he did not have a map. Ning Kei's expression was not much calmer than hers. He stared blankly at the green valley and the faint spring in the depths of the valley. He felt that the familiar aura was becoming more and more condensed and real. He could not help but feel nervous. Because of that aura, he had been a little quiet these days. At this time, he finally confirmed that he was not wrong. After a sudden sharp tension, he became absolutely relaxed. Standing on the snow cliff, he suddenly shouted to the green valley, "Zhang Wuji, where are you?" Standing on the snow cliff, he suddenly shouted to the green valley, "Zhang Wuji, where are you?" Emo Shanshan looked at him expressionlessly. She was probably wondering what was up with this guy again. Ning Kei calmed himself down and said softly to her, "I think we have found the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine." Emo Shanshan's expression turned cold as she frowned and said, "It's that simple?" Ning Kei looked at the valley below the snow cliff in silence. He shook his head and said, "There are many seemingly difficult things in this world, but as long as you can understand the connections between them, they will become very simple." Emo Shanshan simply shook her head and said, "I don't understand what you mean." Ning Kei looked at her and asked, "Do you know who found the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and cut it into ruins with a single sword?" Emo Shanshan continued to shake her head. "Teacher didn't tell me. It seems like he doesn't want to talk about it." Ning Kei said, "I don't know who he is either. I can roughly guess who he is, but I can be sure that he is related to me. Because of this relationship, it will be very easy for me to find the front gate of Devil's Doctrine." Hearing his words, Emo Shanshan's eyes gradually lit up. She could roughly guess who the senior he was talking about was. However, since he didn't say it out loud, she didn't continue. Prince Longqing should also be in the mountain, she reminded him. Ning Kei shook his head and said, "If the Divine Hall knew the location of the front gate of Devil's Doctrine, why didn't they come before the desolate men went south? According to my estimation, there shouldn't be anything good left in this valley. The Divine Hall sent Prince Longqing and the others to the wilderness for the same reason as the Academy. They just wanted us to cultivate." Emo Shanshan blinked her eyelashes slightly and said quietly, "Sometimes, cultivation is a matter between two people." Ning Kei didn't misunderstand her words. He understood what she meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "If Longqing had to defeat me to complete his Taoist heart, do you think I would give him such a chance?" Emo Shanshan shook her head and said, "In cultivation, there are many times when you are forced to do so." Ning Kei said very seriously, "We are all righteous people. Why do we have to fight and kill each other when we meet? Besides, Tianqi Mountain is so big. How can we meet each other so easily?" As soon as he finished speaking, a voice suddenly came from the snow cliff. That person's voice contained very complicated emotions. Some were surprised, some were perplexed, and some were determined. Finally, it all merged into calmness. "I also didn't expect to meet you so soon." Ning Kei and Emo Shanshan looked back and saw a person sitting on the snow cliff hundreds of feet away. Because of the different temperatures on both sides of the snow cliff, the right half of that person's body was covered with thick snow, while the left half of his body was black without any snow. It looked like he was sitting on the boundary between two worlds. One side was snowy, the other was spring, and the other was dark and the other was bright. It looked very strange. Along with the voice, the thick layer of snow covering that person's body slowly disintegrated and slid down. That perfect face, because of the wind and frost, appeared somewhat haggard. His usually clean and spotless black Taoist robe was also full of dirt. Especially the black hair that draped over his shoulders, it made him look even more miserable. But his expression was still calm and awe-inspiring, like the Son of God. The world was so big that when you grew up, you would hold great power and be famous all over the world. But when you wanted to find the little girl next door who gave you lollipops, you still couldn't find any news about her. But the world was also very small. Maybe when you ate a bowl of dirty stew and went to the toilet at the corner of the street, you would suddenly meet the shameless scum who fought with you for lollipops from the little girl next door. The Buddhism sect said that love leaves and hatred will meet. It was referring to the suffering of the human world. But all living things are suffering. So when we live in the human world, we often have to leave the people we love and then keep meeting the people we hate. After the mountain climbing test on the second floor of the academy, in the eyes of the bigwigs at the top of the secular world and in the eyes of the people in the cultivation world, Ning Ke and Prince Long Qing were destined to be lifelong enemies. And they really hated each other. So no matter how big the world was, or how big the vast Tianqi mountain was, they were bound to meet. Prince Long Qing looked at the man and woman on the other side of the snow cliff and suddenly laughed. He could hear his voice from thousands of feet away, so he could naturally see the man's face. How could he forget the man's tired and disgusting face? How could he forget the freckles on his face? How could he forget the feminine dimples on his face? How could he forget the time when he walked out of the thick fog on the back peak of the academy and handed him a flattened cake like an idiot? But he didn't expect that Ning Ke and the calligraphy addict could actually find this valley. Because logically speaking, only the Divine Hall had a map. And if it wasn't for the abnormal weather and the elimination of the big tactical array outside the valley, even the people in the Divine Hall wouldn't be able to find this place. When I came here a few days ago, this valley was still covered with ice and snow. There was no emotion in Prince Long Qing's voice. He said, "I'm sitting here, watching the ice and snow melt, watching the green leaves grow again, watching the difference between each day. It's like I'm watching a miracle, and I'm touched." He looked at Ning Ke on the other side of the snow cliff and continued calmly, "You're late or early, because there's still some time before the gate opens." Ning Ke's warm and sincere voice sounded in the distance. "Your Highness, do you know when the gate opens?" Prince Long Qing was a little annoyed by the enthusiasm in his voice. He said in a low voice, "I don't know. But since you and I are both early, maybe we have time to do something else." Ning Ke didn't have Prince Long Qing's ability to talk regardless of the distance. He opened his palm and put it to his mouth. He shouted, "Play chess, play the zither, or talk nonsense. I'm very good at these things now. If you want to talk about fighting, then forget it. I can't beat you. It's not a big deal for you to bully me." Emo Shanshan stood beside him. Hearing this, she lowered her head and said nothing. His words were so shameless and frank that even the girl who secretly admired him couldn't bear it, let alone Prince Long Qing. Prince Long Qing looked at Ning Ke in the distance and took a deep breath. The night of climbing the mountain was the biggest setback he had ever suffered in his life. A few days ago, he was defeated by Tang Xiaotang, which made his frustration even more intense. Today, he finally saw Ningquebec. The fire in his chest that had been buried in the ashes gradually burned, burning his body and Taoist heart. It was about to ignite his black Taoist robe. Then let this fire burn the heavens in one fell swoop, burn down the fence. Prince Long Qing looked down at the fence made of branches and sawdust in front of him. He reached out and randomly pulled out a piece from the middle. Then he slowly put it on the snow and smiled. He took out a piece of firewood from the fence. Ning Ke didn't know what it meant, but Emo Shanshan did. She raised her head and looked at Prince Long Qing on the other side of the snow cliff expressionlessly. She stretched out her hands from her thick cotton sleeves and casually pinched a few pieces of cold snow and talismans in the wind. With this action, the chi of heaven and earth between the snow cliff violently stirred. The heavy cotton robe on the girl talisman master magically became soft for some reason. It swayed gently with the mountain wind mixed with cold and heat, like a beautiful dress that didn't have any force. There seemed to be no change on the snow cliff. But only the powerhouses like Prince Long Qing and Emo Shanshan could see that the fluffy snowflakes had become fluffier than before. Even the cliff stones under the snow had become soft. Silently, the power of talisman Taoism had been spread among them. Prince Longqing frowned slightly and quietly looked at the other side of the snow cliff. Then he found that the calligraphy addict was more powerful than the legend. He didn't know if she had seen the threshold, but she was already close to knowing Destiny's state. He looked at the other side and asked in a low voice, Ning Ke, do you only know how to hide behind a woman? Hearing this, Ning Ke quickly stood behind Mo Shanshan and slightly squatted down to make sure that the girl's body could completely cover him. Then he poked his head out and shouted with a smile, Don't try to provoke me. I'm such a person. You can't beat me. Think of something else. These words were said without the slightest hint of shame. Prince Longqing couldn't imagine how a disciple of the headmaster of academy could be so shameless. So he became more gloomy and angry because he increasingly felt that he was qualified to be a disciple of the headmaster of academy. He was slightly angry and shouted in a low voice, Do you think you can hide behind a woman for a lifetime? Ning Ke put his head on Mo Shanshan's shoulder and looked at the other side of the snow cliff. He said naturally, If I can't beat you, of course I have to hide. If I can beat you, I won't hide. I just hope that you won't learn from me then. Besides, although the possibility is not high, if I can't beat you in this lifetime, he said very seriously, I'll hide behind her for a lifetime. What can you do to me? The anger on Prince Longqing's face gradually disappeared, and he became expressionless again. Ning Ke was not ashamed at all. He stared at his movements vigilantly and thought about what he should do later. Mo Shanshan's expression was a little complicated at this time. Her thin and long eyelashes gently blinked and her thin and red lips were tightly pressed together. The color of her lips was even more vivid than the color of the white snow and green valley. Hide behind me for a lifetime? For a lifetime? She slowly lowered her head. Her hands that were holding the fu paper trembled slightly. It was not because of nervousness but because of something else. Well written. I finally feel good about myself. I'm strongly collecting the recommendation votes in your hands. Please support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 252. Prince Longqing stood up slowly. The snow fell from his black clothes and landed on his boot. He looked at the other side of the snow cliff and said slowly, You can hide behind the calligraphy addict for a lifetime. But the problem is whether she has the ability to protect you, and whether she is willing to do so. After saying this, he stepped over the low fence of firewood in front of him and walked along the snow cliff expressionlessly. The snow cliff was extremely narrow. It looked wider because of the snow. In fact, it could only accommodate a few people walking side by side. It was like a natural stone bridge in the sky, dividing the snowy foothills and the verdant valley into two parts. The side of the snow cliff facing the verdant valley was extremely steep. The gray rock wall was covered with some weeds, making it difficult to climb. There was no path, so it was very difficult to go down. In a short while, Prince Longqing had walked more than 1,000 feet. He looked at Mo Shanshan and said with a gentle expression, Junior sister Shanshan, have you seen Chen Jia during this trial in the wilderness? She often mentioned you in the West Hill. Mo Shanshan had already woken up from her lost thoughts. She looked at him and bowed slightly. When she was about to say something, Ning Ke flashed out from behind her. He looked at Prince Longqing and said loudly, Your Highness, you are the priest of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. I don't believe that you don't know what happened in the meadow and the palace. Isn't it a little too late to be friendly now? Prince Longqing's face darkened slightly. He did know about the conflict between the calligraphy addict and his fiancée. But he was a proud person. The reason why he was so gentle to the calligraphy addict was because he respected her. How could it be like what Ning Ke said? Wasn't that almost like a villain? He looked at Ning Ke in the distance and suddenly frowned. He found that Ning Ke had made a lot of progress after a few months. He said, You are about to enter the see-through state. It seems that the back of the mountain of the academy is really helpful to you. Ninkei looked at him and said with a smile, Your Highness is joking again. If it's not helpful, why did the two of us fight to the death that day and let those perverts in the back of the mountain watch? Hearing the hidden mockery in his words, Prince Long Qing did not get angry. He looked at him and said calmly, We met in Chang'an, in the back of the mountain of the academy, and even in the depths of Tianqi Mountain. Sometimes I have to believe in the words of the common people. Perhaps you and I are destined to be enemies for life. Ninkei said, I don't want this kind of fate. During the conversation, Prince Long Qing's footsteps did not stop. He walked a little further towards the other end of the snow cliff. He looked at Ninkei with a smile and suddenly said, Haotian bestows thousands of lucky chances on the world. If they come to you, you can't get rid of them no matter whether you want them or not. Just like today, I will break into the knowing destiny state, and you will also break into the see-through state. I suddenly thought, why don't we make a bet on the date of breaking into the realm? If the headmaster of the academy knows that I gamble, how can I live? Ninkei thought of the various kinds of tokens in Seventh Sister's room at the back of the mountain of the academy and said seriously, And cultivation depends on the individual. Everyone has their own lucky chances. Why do we have to mix together? Then he looked at Prince Long Qing, who was getting closer, and said, And why should I give you a chance to complete your Taoist heart? If we are destined to be enemies for life, then I won't do anything that might help you. The first sentence was a lie, and the second was a sincere statement. Prince Long Qing was slightly startled. He did not expect this guy to be so honest. He could not help but smile and said, Do you want me to try to humiliate you before you do it? Ninkei said seriously, The Buddhism sect once said that one should wash one's face clean. If your Highness wants to humiliate me, please don't be shy. Prince Long Qing was really startled. He looked at him silently for a long time and said, Are you really a Tang? Ninkei replied, Your Highness, you can see me as a yen. Then he was startled, shook his head and said with a smile, I just found out today that the name yen is not a nice name. Prince Long Qing was a yen and was mocked as a eunuch, so he did not want to tolerate it anymore. He looked at Ninkei coldly and said, If you don't fight back, I can. Ninkei looked at him and said, You don't want to fight back, but you still want to fight. Do you want to kill me? Prince Long Qing shook his head and said, I can defeat you. Ninkei's expression became unprecedentedly serious. He quietly looked at the haggard but still handsome face of Prince Long Qing. After a long silence, he said in a heavy tone, Your Highness, please don't try to defeat me, because I won't give you such a chance. If you touch a finger of mine, I will die in front of you. The snow cliff was very narrow. It seemed very long, but there would be a moment when they walked to the end. Prince Long Qing and Ninkei and Mo Shanshan stood opposite each other on the snow cliff. The wind and snow gradually rose. At this moment, Ninkei said such a thing. If you don't buy me gemstones, I'll die for you to see. If you don't make me breakfast, I'll die for you to see. Such stories and scenes of quarrels were very common. The subject of the words, die for you to see, was usually, I'll die for you to see. This was because only shrews in the marketplace would use such extremely shameless means when they quarreled. However, Ninkei said it like this, and because of his solemn expression and serious tone, his words did not sound like a shrew who beat her husband and scolded her neighbor in a rainy alley. Instead, he sounded quite calm and generous, like a child who picked up a yellowish leaf in the bleak wind and was about to hold a sword and go on a long journey. As for the emotions and choices between life and death, Ninkei had done too many times in his life, so he was very calm. And because of his calmness, the word die that came out of his mouth was more powerful than anyone else's. The stubborn and powerful big black horse had been extremely arrogant in the horse farm all his life. However, when he heard Ninkei say the word die in the meadow of the academy, He was so scared that his limbs went soft and he dared not have any disloyal thoughts from then on. Prince Longqing was a human being, so of course he could understand these words. I just don't want your Taoist heart to be complete. Defeating me and committing suicide were two different things. More importantly, he could hear the generosity and ruthlessness hidden in Ning Kei's calm words. If he forced himself to fight, Ning Kei would really dare to die in front of him and the world. He had seen many people in the judicial department who were not afraid of death and did not care about the lives of others. There were subordinates, remnants of the devil's doctrine, and those rebels. But he had never seen anyone who was so ruthless or did not care about himself. Emo Shanshan also understood Ning Kei's words. Her cheeks wrapped in a scarf looked slightly pale. Ning Kei looked at Prince Longqing and said, The Academy and the Divine Hall hate each other, but I think they are not interested in fighting. But if I die here today, things will become very troublesome. I have to remind you that the Yen Kingdom is too weak, and my second brother has always been unreasonable. Prince Longqing looked at his face and frowned slightly. He said, You are either hiding behind a woman or hiding behind a mountain school. I am beginning to doubt whether you are a Tang or a man. I have said that this kind of verbal attack has no effect on me. Ning Kei looked at him and answered seriously, And in this world, except for a few people, who doesn't hide behind a mountain school? If you are expelled from the Peach Mountain by the Divine Hall today, the remnants of the Devil's doctrine who have made enemies with you over the years, or those who usually do not dare to provoke you, will all want to bite you. Can you bear it? Prince Longqing looked at him in silence. He suddenly realized that although this guy was young, he could see through the world so clearly, or perhaps gloomily, without the usual hot-bloodedness of young people. Emo Shanshan looked at Ning Kei's back and also fell into silence. She had quietly listened to the conversation for such a long time, and naturally thought of the lesson Ning Kei had given her in the carriage on the journey to the palace. What if I can't beat him? Run. What if two tigers meet? Pretend to be hurt and beg for mercy, saying that I have loved you silently for 10,000 years, and do everything to weaken his will. Beat his mother, kill his family, slap his son, and do everything to provoke him and make him lose his mind. If you wear shoes, you go to the thorny land. If you wear thick clothes, you choose the cold land. Today, seeing Ning Kei's response, she finally understood that these seemingly ridiculous words hid the absolute determination to create or wait for victory by any means necessary, regardless of reputation or dignity. To sum up such thoughts, that person must have experienced many trials of life and death and humiliation in his life. Prince Longqing looked at Ning Kei's face and suddenly laughed. His black hair scattered on his shoulders gently swayed with the snowy wind, as if it was about to float away. However, the words that came slowly from his thin lips were not the least bit out of this world. Today your response seemed shameless, but you have great forbearance and a strong will. Those who know you can't wait to drink 3,000 cups with you, but I know that you can't drink. Speaking of which, I still can't forget your little handmaiden who likes to drink. If you agree, I am willing to exchange 3 cities in the west of Yen Kingdom for her. In the future, it will be good to have a drinking companion. Suddenly, the West Hill Divine's son mentioned Sang Sang far away in Chang'an. Of course, it was not because he really had feelings for her, but a valiant attempt to remove the fence of his Taoist heart. Ning Kei slightly tilted his head and looked at him carefully, without a trace of emotion in his eyes. He was thinking about Hu in Chang, and could make him think that Sang Sang was worth testing. Then he smiled and said, The one in my family is not worth much, but I won't exchange her even if she is beautiful. Prince Longqing slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said, You won't exchange her even if she is beautiful. It seems that this little handmaiden is really important to you. Emo Shanshan's thin and dark eyebrows slowly furrowed. She looked at Prince Longqing, who was not far away from her. She could hear the hidden threat in his words and his determination to anger Ning Quebec. Then she felt some subtle changes in Ning Kei's posture. It seemed that he only slightly straightened his shoulders, but all the previous and scrupulous means disappeared. What was left was only a stubborn young man in the wind and snow. She knew that Prince Longqing had finally grasped Ning Kei's vital point. She could not help but slightly lower her eyes and quickly entered the absolute state of mind of Ming Ning. The fu paper between her fingers began to tremble even though there was no wind. Ning Kei suddenly said, "I have a horse." The wind and snow on the snow cliff suddenly stopped, and it was quiet. A dark horse. Ning Kei straightened his body and looked at Prince Longqing calmly. He continued, "Your fiancée Princess Qin Jia also has a horse. A white horse. No matter if it is a dark horse or a white horse, a stallion or a mare, whoever can ride on the other is a good horse." Hearing this, Prince Longqing's face suddenly darkened. He took another step forward, and the snow on the cliff rose from the ground, as if it began to roll up a snowstorm from the ground to the sky. Emo Shanshan slowly raised her head and looked at Prince Longqing, who was gradually approaching. She thought of the last words that Ning Kei had said in the carriage. A cold wind blew on her face, and her face was cold and beautiful. Prince Longqing looked at her expressionlessly and said, "Does Emochi really want to fight against the Divine Hall? But I am really curious about the state that the Calligraphy Addict's half-divine talisman has reached." "Did I say that I want to fight with you? Did I say that she wants to fight with you?" Ning Kei suddenly raised his right arm and pointed at his face. He said, "In the palace, my dark horse defeated your white horse. I also want to see if I can defeat you. So I accept your first bet." Emo Shanshan looked at his profile in confusion. She thought, "You didn't agree before, why did you agree now?" Prince Longqing didn't want to agree, but he saw a brocade bag hanging on his wrist when Ning Kei pointed at it. The brocade bag was silver blue and embroidered with simple flowers. It looked very ordinary as it swayed gently in the wind and snow. But Prince Longqing knew that the brocade bag was not ordinary. He felt the strong aura coming from it, so he decided to wait and see what Ning Kei wanted to say. A complete divine talisman was qualified to make anyone wait for a moment, no matter when, where or what situation it was. He said expressionlessly, "Say it." Ning Kei said, "Let's make a bet on the date of breaking the realm. The first one to break the realm will be the winner, and the loser will destroy his snow mountain and ocean of Qi. If I win, I will leave the academy and you will leave the Divine Hall." It was a very ordinary tone, but the content of the bet was very unusual. If the cultivator's snow mountain and ocean of Qi were destroyed, he would be a useless person. Especially the supplementary conditions, it was like pulling out his tendons and peeling off his bones. It was extremely cruel. He was gambling with the two most precious things of a cultivator. Ning Kei looked at him and said, "This bet is to your advantage, because you need to get rid of me, the obstacle in your heart. But you have never been an obstacle to my cultivation. But you don't need to thank me. Because in the beginning I wanted to kill you, but I didn't want to take the risk. Now I'm just giving myself a chance to kill you." Prince Longqing looked at him quietly, and suddenly laughed against the wind and snow on the cliff. On the snow cliff, a big bet began. "In the name of Haotian. In the name of the headmaster of the academy." Ning Kei looked at Prince Longqing and said with a smile, "I hope you are well the next time we meet." Then his smile gradually faded, and he said slowly and firmly, "If you are well, then I am a fool." After saying this, he jumped off the snow cliff with Emo Shanshan and jumped into the green valley. After a moment, a black flower suddenly grew between the steep rock walls, and the falling speed suddenly decreased. Prince Longqing walked to the edge of the snow cliff and looked down the rock wall. He silently thought of the divine talisman in the bag, which was obviously made by Uncle Yen Sei, and felt a sense of loss. Ning Kei's state was not good, and his character was terrible. But he was still a world wayfarer. Although he was the West Hill Divine Son, he could not kill him at will, unless he really did not care about provoking a war between the Academy and the Divine Hall. Fortunately, he had tried his best to force Ning Ke into a desperate situation with the bet, and the Academy could not say anything after that. Thinking that he could finally remove the firewood in his heart, he calmed down and walked slowly back along the snow cliff. He sat cross-legged behind the firewood fence, meditating in the wind and snow, and gradually became a snowman, waiting for the day to break the realm. It's a little late. Sorry, this chapter is too hard to write. No matter how stupid the party of reason is, it can't survive in this world. This chapter has been changed several times, not to change the details, but to change the plot, which I rarely do. At 12 o'clock, I was still discussing with someone about what was right and what was wrong in the plot. So, I decided to kill the remaining moral integrity and the remaining party of reason from tomorrow onwards. Everything is based on looking good and feeling good. Everything is based on making myself feel good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 253. The steep cliff was rising rapidly in front of them. The weeds between the cliff crevices were dragged into a green line and then disappeared quickly. Mo Shanshan held Ning Ke's belt tightly with her left hand as the chilly wind blew against her cheeks. There was no panic in her eyes, nor did she cry out, because she believed that a person like Ning Ke would never commit suicide. With a bang, the big black umbrella opened in the air. Their bodies shook heavily and the speed of their fall slowed down. They left the cliff with the wind and floated toward the broad-leaved forest not far away. Her eyes squinted because of the wind. She raised her head and saw that the huge black umbrella covered the snowy sky. Even when the strong mountain wind blew, it only slightly deformed. There were no signs of it collapsing. She couldn't help but be curious. What material was this black umbrella made of? How could it be so sturdy? Ning Ke held the handle of the big black umbrella tightly with his right hand and held the calligraphy addict's waist with his left hand. He stared at the ground that was getting closer and closer, and did not pay attention to the warm and smooth feeling between his fingers. He had jumped off the cliff many times with the little girl in his arms. He knew that although the black umbrella was strong, the surface area was too small, and it would not feel good when they landed. When they were still several feet away from the ground, a very light and pure talisman intent was released from Mo Shanshan's fingers. The air suddenly seemed to become a little sticky, and the speed of their fall slowed down again. Ning Ke knew that Mo Shanshan had made a move, so he stopped preparing to use the talisman and held her waist tightly. With a muffled sound, he bent his knees slightly and landed heavily on the ground outside the forest. His bones and muscles instantly tightened and loosened the moment he landed, perfectly neutralizing most of the impact. The girl in his arms seemed to not notice anything at all. Ning Ke loosened his arms and nodded to her. Mo Shanshan shook her head and calmly left his arms. The ground outside the forest was covered with countless fallen leaves, which were soft when stepped on. It was unknown how many years the leaves had accumulated to such a thick layer. But the amazing thing was that there was no smell of decay. Although this forest was a broad-leaved forest, it had only just seen the light of day. The green leaves between the branches were plucked out, unable to hide the starry snowflakes that seeped through the snow cliff, making them look like stars of green. The two walked into the green forest and disappeared in a moment. They walked into the green forest and gradually moved away from the snow cliff. There were no more snowflakes from the world outside the mountain. However, the sky above the valley was still gray, contrasting with the green in the forest, making it look even colder. Ning Ke did not know whether it was because of the pressure brought by the promise of breaking the realm, or because Prince Long Qing mentioned Sang Sang who was far away in Chang'an, but he was very quiet after entering the forest. He was not as active as he used to be, but just walked in silence. Mo Shanshan was also very silent. She looked at his back and thought of the previous conversation on the snow cliff. She thought of the little handmaiden whom Ning Ke had protected against his own will. She thought of the bet that was not bloody but extremely cruel. She felt sad and worried for a while. She stepped on the fallen leaves in the forest silently and did not make any sound. Looking from the top of the snow cliff, this verdant valley was not very big. But when they actually arrived, they discovered that this valley did not look very wide, but it was actually very deep. The two of them walked silently in the forest for almost half a day, but they still had not reached the end of the valley. This place was far enough from the snow cliff, so they did not need to worry about being heard or chased by Prince Longqing. Emo Shanshan looked at the big black umbrella behind Ning Ke and finally could not suppress the doubts in her heart. She asked, "Why didn't you fight before?" Ning Ke stopped and looked back at her. He asked, "Why?" Emo Shanshan looked at his eyes and said seriously, "When you taught me how to fight in the carriage, you once said that when two tigers meet, the most important thing to remember is that the brave one wins." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke replied, "In front of Longqing, I am not a tiger." Emo Shanshan glanced at the brocade bag hanging on his wrist and said, "With the divine talisman in hand, even a child can become a tiger." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Master has spent too much time and energy to write the divine talisman that can be used by people in the no-doubt state. As his disciple, I can't abuse it. Besides, you and I are both masters of talisman Taoism. We should be very clear that this kind of stimulating talisman is not made by ourselves. It is difficult for a talisman master to release the real talisman power in it. I am not sure that I can hurt Longqing with this talisman." Emo Shanshan slightly raised her small face and looked at him seriously. She said, "And me." Ning Ke said sincerely, "Thank you. But this is between me and Longqing. There is no reason for you to take risk. What's more, you came here under the edict of the Divine Hall. I can't let you fall out with the Divine Hall for me." He looked at the cliff vaguely seen outside the green forest and said, "The purpose of entering the mountain is for the tomes of arcane. In the end, I will still face to face with Prince Longqing. He wants to force me into a desperate situation where I can't retreat. I also have the same idea. It will be good for the later things if I can get rid of him in advance." Emo Shanshan slightly frowned and said, "Prince Longqing is not so easy to get rid of." Ning Ke said, "In the past, it was not easy to get rid of him. But now with the promise of breaking the realm, the situation is completely different. As long as I can break the realm before him, then he will be killed." He spoke slowly and calmly, as if he was talking about a matter of course. Emo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly realized that he seemed to have never thought that he would lose this bet. He also did not think that even if he won, what if the other party went back on his words? Although the divine son of Westhill was a devout believer of Haotian, if he really wanted to destroy his cultivation and leave the divine hall, the oath made in the name of Haotian might not really be binding. She asked, "What if you lose this bet?" Ning Ke simply answered, "I will not lose." Emo Shanshan did not hesitate to ask, "If?" Ning Ke was slightly startled and said, "If I lose, then I lose. I have gone through a lot of hardships to clear the acupoints. Would I really be so stupid to fulfill the bet and become a useless person again?" Emo Shanshan could not believe her ears and asked, "Then what about the headmaster's reputation?" Ning Ke thought of Lin Ling, the Psyche master who died in the Tang camp of the palace, and laughed. "I have not seen the headmaster, but according to the senior brothers and sisters, he should not care. On the contrary, if I really choose to become a useless person after losing the bet and then leave the academy pitifully, he may be very angry at himself for taking in such a stupid student." Emo Shanshan still could not understand this sentence. Ning Ke explained, "This sentence means that the headmaster does not care about his reputation. What if Prince Longqing loses to you and goes back on his words? If I enter the see-through realm first, he will have to fulfill the promise. It is not so easy to challenge someone in a higher state. You have entered the see-through state, but you are only at the lower level. How can you surpass 2 states and win? No matter how good you are at fighting, the gap between the states is still too big. Ning Ke looked at her and suddenly asked seriously, if the breakthrough is suddenly disturbed by the outside world at the most critical moment, what will happen? Mo Shanshan did not know why he was concerned about this. After thinking for a moment, she said, it depends on what kind of outside interference it is. Ning Ke said, the most direct and strong kind. Mo Shanshan said, the breakthrough will suffer a severe backfire, and it is even possible that it will be impossible for him to break the realm in this life. Ning Ke nodded and said, that would be the best. Then the two fell into silence again. Ning Ke seemed to be walking silently and aimlessly, but in fact, he had been following a certain direction. The strong and proud aura was like a bright lamp between heaven and earth, guiding him through the green forest, through a swamp, and then through a muddy, rugged, wet and misty mountain road, and finally came to a lake. The lake was not large, with a radius of less than 1,000 feet. The lake bank was winding, and the water rippled gently. It was unknown how long this strange valley had existed, and there was no trace of artificial carving. The verdant valley was warmer than the snow-capped peak of Tianqi Mountain outside, but in fact it was still a little cold. It was more like the winter in Chang and City. The surface of the lake bank was covered with extremely thin ice, which automatically dispersed when the water rippled, and gradually condensed on the quieter surface in the distance. There seemed to be no artificial traces, and it was a natural lake in the valley. But Ning Ke did not think so, because the strong and familiar aura came from the depths of the lake. He stood by the lake and stared at the lake for a long time. Through the clear water, he saw the white sand and round stones at the bottom, but he did not see anything unusual. Mo Shanshan couldn't sense the strong aura, but she could clearly sense the existence of other things. She walked to Ning Ke's side and looked at the fish swimming slowly in the lake. She said softly, "This lake is a big tactical array. It's strange that the lake itself is the eye of the array, which seems to violate the principles of tactical arrays." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "The tactical array of the unknown place is naturally a little different from ordinary tactical arrays." "You mean this lake is the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine?" She looked at the reflection of the snow-capped peak in the distance, and suddenly remembered some records in the scriptures. She said in a trembling voice, "It was recorded in the scriptures that there is a lake in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Is it this lake?" Ning Ke said, "It should be right." Mo Shanshan looked at the ordinary lake in front of her, and could not believe that she found the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine so easily. She said, "I really did not expect that I would have the opportunity to see the remains of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in my life. If it were other cultivators, they would be very excited to see the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine that had been destroyed in time, and to see the legendary unknown place. They would even jump into the lake in excitement. If it were any other time, Ning Ke might also be so excited, but now he was very calm, because whether the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane was hidden at the bottom of the lake or the relics of the predecessor in the sect, it had nothing to do with him for the time being. He suddenly asked, "Does this lake have a name? Is it mentioned in the West Hill scriptures?" Mo Shanshan asked, "Why do you care about this?" Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "In the future, the history books will record that Ning Ke, the 13th disciple of the second floor of the academy, broke through the see-through realm by this lake. How can this lake not have a name? Neither the nameless lake nor the unnamed lake sounds good." Mo Shanshan sighed, thinking that breaking through the realm was so difficult and mysterious. How could it be broken through so easily? His words were a little too arrogant, so she said helplessly, "The Devil's Doctrine calls themselves the Enlightenment sect, so they call this lake Daming Lake." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 254. The verdant valley seemed to be a foreign land isolated from the world. The lake water reflected the high snow-capped peak. The Tianqi mountain outside the valley was windy and snowy, and the temperature dropped day by day. But it was still relatively warm here, which was very strange. Ning Ke and Mo Shanshan did not find the existence of hot springs or geothermal heat, so they could only attribute this unusual phenomenon to the function of the tactical array. They could not help feeling shocked that a big tactical array could cover the sky and the earth against the season. They were even more certain that the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which had not appeared for decades, was in the lake in front of them. According to Prince Longqing, it was not yet time for the mountain gate to open. The two of them did not know when it would open. Thinking that there would be a strange phenomenon, they could only wait quietly and do what they had to do at the same time. Ning Ke walked to a big stone by the lake and sat down. He looked at the strange scaleless fish swimming in the clear lake water. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "How can I break the realm?" This was a very direct question, and also a very stupid one. It was a question that all the grand cultivators in the world could not answer. Because on the long road of cultivation, passers-by saw different scenery along the way. How could there be a ready-made answer? If breaking the realm could be answered, then the headmaster of the academy must be the best person to answer this question. Didn't it mean that the senior brothers and sisters on the second floor of the academy should have broken the 5 states long ago? Ning Ke was very clear that he would inevitably encounter mountains, one after another on the road of cultivation. He had long been aware of this and waited calmly. However, he had been standing outside the Dongxian gate for several months without any progress. Now, because of the bet with Prince Longqing, he suddenly had a very heavy time pressure, so he subconsciously asked. Mo Shanshan looked at him and said softly, "This kind of question can only be answered by you." Ning Ke put his hand into the slightly cold lake water and scared away a few fish. After thinking for a moment, he said, "I think the most important thing is that you must have the desire to break the realm. If you don't even think about it, the threshold will definitely be higher. Then you must have confidence. You must believe that you can break the realm." As for cultivation, his experience was somewhat unusual. Thanks to the vermilion bird black umbrella and the precious pill from the unknown place, he did not encounter any threshold at all. Inexplicably, he directly and inexplicably went from the initial enlightenment to the perception and then to the no-doubt state, and past the most difficult point of virtual and real. However, in the summer, he once entered into talisman Taoism by observing the rain, so he had some experience. Now, looking at the threshold of the see-through realm, his desire to break the realm was very strong. The great pressure brought to him by Prince Longqing and time had all turned into motivation. At this moment, how could he still care about the state of mind? However, when he looked at the fish swimming freely in the distance in the clear lake water, at the fish nearby that were still a bit nervous after being scared away by him, he knew very well what he lacked the most right now. Previously, when he said to Mo Shanshan that he would not lose, and the following 2 sentences about the Daming Lake, he seemed to be full of confidence. But in fact, that was just to strengthen his confidence, not to say that he already had the confidence. Facing the West Hill Divine Son, who had stood outside the knowing destiny threshold for many years, how could he really have the confidence? What's more, breaking the realm was too mysterious. It was like the wind and snow in the wilderness. It came without saying. Even if it was a blue sky with the scorching sun overhead, a gust of wind might cause snowflakes to fall. Even if it was not said to come, it really wouldn't. Even if the sky was full of lead clouds and the water was bitterly cold, it might still not snow for several months. Mo Shanshan walked to the stone and followed his gaze to the lake. She said, "You don't have the confidence? I always thought that I was a genius. It seemed that there was nothing I couldn't learn. Even though I later found that I didn't have the aptitude for cultivation, I still felt that I was much more vigorous than others. Do you know? Last year, I was still thinking about how to kill a powerhouse in the see-through realm with 3 knives. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, later on, it was smooth sailing on the road of cultivation, including talisman Taoism. My master and many people thought that I was a genius. However, my confidence became weaker because I saw many real geniuses in cultivation, including you. Emo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly. She didn't know what to say. Eldest brother and second brother were the real cultivation geniuses. Chen Pippi, who was about the same age as her but had already entered the knowing destiny state, was the real genius. Compared with these geniuses, what was the Tao addict Yi Hongyu? What was Prince Long Qing? What was she? What's more, there was the unknown place. When I thought that the world wayfarers coming from there were all grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state, I felt uncomfortable all over and felt that it was too boring. Emo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him seriously. She said, "Then how can I make you more confident?" Ning Ke said seriously, "I need praise." Even if the calligraphy addict blushed even more, she really couldn't praise him in front of him. However, at this time, she finally confirmed that the guy in front of her really didn't know anything, so she chose another way. She looked at Ning Ke and sighed. "Do you know what the unknown place is in the world?" Ning Ke wiped the water on his hands on his chest and laughed. "Since it is the unknown place, how can I know?" She shook her head and said, "The unknown place consists of an abbey, a temple, a gate and the second floor. The abbey is the Jishou Abbey, the temple is the Xiankong Temple, the gate is the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and the second floor is naturally the second floor of the Academy." Ning Ke stared at her face and was completely shocked and speechless. After a long time, he suppressed the chaotic emotions in his mind and shouted with a trace of embarrassment and anger, "Last time you told me that it was a mysterious place outside the secular world. Few people can see these places with their own eyes. Even those who have been there won't talk about it after coming out. That's why it is called the unknown place. But the Academy is in the south of Chang'an City. Everyone knows where it is, so how can it be unknown? The second floor of the Academy rarely appears in the world. Of course, compared to the Jishou Abbey in the mountains and the Xiankong Temple in the wilderness, it is indeed in the secular world." Emo Shanshan looked at him and said, "There is a saying in the world that the joys and sorrows of the secular world and the outside world are never connected. If they can connect, they will be sages." She probably thought of the sigh that her teacher had once revealed and the legend of that person in the cultivation world. She looked slightly serious and continued, "If they can connect, they will be sages." Although the elder of the Lank Temple once said that the headmaster of the Academy would never admit that he is a sage, the second floor of the Academy is of course the land of sages. She stared into his eyes and continued, "You come from the second floor of the Academy, the only land of sages in the world. Then no one is qualified to affect your confidence. Why are you not confident?" Ning Ke said in disbelief, "According to what you said, I am the legendary world wayfarer." Emo Shanshan looked at him and nodded. Then she frowned and added seriously, "Of course, the legendary world wayfarers are not as weak as you." Ning Ke, who was hurt by the simple girl again, did not refute this time because he had not completely gotten rid of the shock and shame. He thought of the arrogant words that he had said to the world wayfarer and realized that he had been scolded. He thought of the time when he and Sang Sang went to the west city of Chang'an to win money from the gambling house and won it from him. He could not help but feel ashamed that he had stepped into two stinky gutters. The second floor of the Academy was the unknown place, and he was a world wayfarer. It would make sense if the world wayfarers of the Academy in the past were as strong and powerful as second brother. However, the arrogant man who carried the gavel and those mysterious senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain did not look like otherworldly sublime beings at all. Emo Shanshan looked at him and asked, "Do you still have confidence after knowing these things?" Ning Ke woke up and said happily, "I am the world wayfarer of the Academy. I am much stronger than Prince Long Qing, the divine son of West Hill, in terms of background, temperament and style. Why don't I have the confidence to trample him to death? Mo Shanshan did not expect that his confidence came from this. She could not help but fall silent. After a moment she said softly, "When breaking the realm, you need not only desire and confidence, but also opportunity. When I was 14, I received a volume of scripture written by my teacher and understood the mystery of heaven and earth after reading it for half a night. I hope you can find your opportunity as soon as possible." Ning Ke thought of what Master Huang Yang had taught him in the Wanyan Tower and nodded. However, opportunity was something that could only be found by chance. Just like the rain in summer, if it had fallen earlier or later, he might not have known it. Just like the lake water overflowing the willow embankment, the lake water must be full. However, if it wanted to overflow the long embankment without spreading into a flood, it needed other reasons. Ning Ke was neither a typical Tang nor a typical cultivator. He was not good at sitting and discussing Tao or understanding Tao. His cultivation, like his survival, was always full of perseverance and ruthlessness. It was the same since he was a child when he meditated hard. It was the same after he entered the academy and entered the old library. Later, he understood that life was like a problem and all kinds of infatuation. He was still used to solving problems to cultivate, but it was no longer that hard. Looking at the looming threshold of see-through at the bottom of the clear lake, he started his cultivation again. If he did not know how to break it, then he would see through it. He looked at the lake, the twilight haze, and the reflected stars in the night sky. He broke a willow branch and found a fishhook from his luggage. He hung a few pieces of dried meat given by the desolate women on it and hung it into the calm lake. It disturbed the stars and woke up the fish swimming under the lake rock. Then he started fishing. The willow branch by the Daming Lake was extremely tough and suitable for fishing, perhaps because it had been tempered for thousands of years by the aura of heaven and earth drawn by the front gate tactical array of the Devil's Doctrine. The willow branch by the Daming Lake rose and fell. After a while, some fish swallowed the bait and were hooked. He did not pick up the rod, but just quietly held the willow branch, as if holding the most important thing in his life. The fish forcibly broke free from the hook and ran away in panic, splashing the water with a very light blood color. The willow branch had no bait or hook and was quietly hanging in the water. Ning Ke just sat on the rocks by the lake for the whole night. For him at this time, the fish in the lake were like the opportunity he needed to break the realm. Those who were willing to take the bait, and those who were unwilling, he would not force them. "I caught a cold yesterday. It's not serious, but my mouth is very bitter and I feel a little dizzy. Fortunately, tomorrow is Saturday and I can rest. Don't rush to vote for the monthly vote. Anyway, we are all together. Let's wait for those guys to surpass us first. Then we will overtake them from behind and pass them all together. That will be fun, ha. Have a good weekend, see you the day after tomorrow. In addition, I also need praise. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.